If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People who have explored abandoned, rundown, and haunted places, forests, etc. What scary, paranormal, or otherworldly things have you seen?
I had this weird feeling when I was about 13 years old, with one of my younger cousins while about to explore an abandoned house right next to the one of my grandparents. One day, we were passing a ball between each other, and at the next moment, I turned around towards the basement door creaking open a little inwards. Note that there was no wind, which made us both bolt out of there. On the next day, as we continued our game in a meadow next to the same old house, I had this strange feeling that someone was watching me. At first, I decided to not pay attention, but at the same time, I was curious, so I turned my attention to the attic window of the house and saw some dark figure with one hand on the window's bottom frame and had a huge creepy grin on its face while I just looked at it. Afterwards, I told my cousin about it, but he didn't believe me. So, what do you guys think this thing could have been? A demon? Some other entity? I'd like to read your opinions. When I was young, my brother, myself, and our two friends, who were twin brothers, decided to sneak out of our houses and explore an abandoned house just outside of our neighborhood. The house was dark, decrepit, and secluded in a small wooded area with only a dirt driveway leading to it. We approached through the woods, and after a quick check that nobody was nearby, entered through the back door, which opened into the kitchen area. There was nothing but a round table and a dusty old glass fishbowl sitting directly in the center. We walked right past that and went up the stairs to the second floor. We peeked our heads into the different rooms when suddenly we heard glass shatter from downstairs. We all bolted downstairs, and upon seeing the broken fishbowl on the kitchen floor, fled out the back into the woods. Freaked us out enough to get turned around in otherwise familiar woods. There was a house in my subdivision that was constantly on the market. I remember seeing some people move in and out of the house in less than a week. It was bought and sold at least 3 times during the 5 years I lived there. I went in it once with some friends, and it just seemed like a normal house upstairs. The basement gave major creep vibes, as you would expect. While in the basement, I and my friends suddenly felt as if we couldn't breathe. We rushed out and caught our breath after exiting the front door. Some people think what we experienced was related to mold or a gas leak. I can't prove otherwise. As we walked away, we all heard sort of a loud thudding sound coming from the house. Maybe it was our hearts pounding in our chests, maybe it was hallucinations from oxygen deprivation, and maybe it was a being trying to communicate from another plane of existence. I never went inside the house again, but I drove past it daily. I always got the sense I was being watched when I passed by. There are a few that startled me since I started exploring in 1983. Once, while we were in an abandoned prison, we heard someone talking. We immediately pushed to where we heard the talking. Nothing. So we split up to either end of the block. We were about to give up, and we heard the same 2 guys talking. Nothing clear. And it is between us. Nothing in the cells and nothing in the wet wall on either side. We left several guys in place and headed up a floor. Nothing. We stand there till we give up and head down. The guys downstairs heard the talking downstairs, and it was in that hallway. Shoulder shrug, and we finished our explore. Once in the basement of a TB hospital, we had a glowing mass, looked like a plastic bag in the wind, appear and drift into a wall. It was green. We all said, "Did you see that?" I was at Sloss Furnace in Birmingham, Alabama, USA, taking pictures. A friend came with myself and my 12-year-old. The 12-year-old had seen one of the ghost hunt videos and was in a steam tunnel in the dark with a tape recorder trying to get a response. I was upstairs trying to get some additional shots. I hear our friend outside calling my name in a panic. I go see what is going on, and he is shaking. I finally get him to make sense, and he tells me he was heading out of a building and felt 2 hands on his shoulders push him on out of the building. He thought it was me and turned only to see a very empty room. He went and sat by the car while I collected my child to take him back home. I deliberately did not tell him anything about this place because he was so weird about stuff. I was in the basement of an outbuilding across the street from the Atlanta prison farm. I had city permitted access prior to it burning down. It was my child, myself, and a friend of ours. I heard boots walking upstairs and all through the house. I figured it was a patrol and went upstairs to meet and show my permit. Upon getting upstairs, I found all the windows and exterior doors screwed shut. I had everyone help me search the entire empty small house. Nothing. My father's old house is right next to the one we currently live in. It was the house of my childhood. He was an alcoholic and abusive person. The house basically started to rot with him living in it. When he passed away, We had to close the house due to his brothers and sisters' request, them claiming it had too many bad memories. My father, when drunk, would often talk about Satan, I assume because my mom came from a religious family and it would get under her skin. And honestly, it was kind of freaky how he really looked like a man possessed when angry. What does make me believe the house is haunted is that often I think I see a figure in the window staring at the street, and a week after his funeral I had a dream that I was trapped in that house, and when I looked behind me, my father was there. Pale as a ghost and with a blank face that really creeped me out. I was only about 6 to 7 years old when this happened, but it remains etched in my memory. I still remember exactly what the rooms looked like. And unfortunately, due to some mental illnesses, I have memory issues and don't remember much of my life at all except a general idea of what happened. But this is what I remember. I grew up in central Georgia. I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Macon at the time, and we'd come for a big family visit for my dad's side. There was an absolutely beautiful 2-story abandoned house next door. It was old, very old. Us kids always were creeped out by it and said it was haunted. We even saw shadow figures in the windows and the curtains move. Well, the family decided to go explore it. I was not particularly excited. We go inside, and it's gorgeous and still fully furnished. There is a stairwell up to the 2nd story, it's enclosed with 2 doors halfway up, no landing, and directly across from each other. My whole family heads all the way upstairs while one cousin stays downstairs. I and my other older sibling decided to check out the door on the left. It's a library. A fancy one. It smells like mildew and old books. We walk around looking for a few minutes and suddenly start hearing loud whispering. I don't know how else to explain it. It's coming from the stairwell or other room. It's not our family, we can also hear them. So we open the door to the opposite room. It was a bathroom. With a clawfoot tub. My cousin walks in first, with me peeping around behind her. I'll never forget what we saw next. There were 2 skeletons lying foot to head in the empty tub, whispering to each other. We froze for a second until they both turned and looked at us. Immediately, my cousin threw me over her shoulder and sprinted back to our aunts. We never told them what we saw, but my oldest cousin asked why we were whispering and was very confused when we told her we weren't. All the adults just felt generally creeped out. I grew up in rural northeastern Indiana, and a friend who lived a mile up the road was the daughter of a local farmer. Not too far from their house was an abandoned home with a barn on a plot of land that her family owned. It always gave me the creeps whenever I rode my bike past, but I attributed that to the fact that it was a creepy old house with busted out windows surrounded by overgrown trees and shrubbery. Anyway, one day during the summer, she asked if I and some friends wanted to see the inside of it. We, of course, said yes. The friends we were meeting lived about 1.5 miles in the opposite direction, so I got there before they did, so she and I went inside. It was a pretty standard vacant home. The furniture was gone, but they'd left stuff like cups and empty cigar boxes and cans strewn about when they left the place. As we were standing downstairs, waiting for my other friends to arrive, we could hear what were very clearly footsteps upstairs on the floor above us. The house was from the 1800s and had wood floors, just like all the others in our area, so we both knew the sound well. This was in the middle of the day, though. The circumstances were as far from creepy as it was possible to get in a vacant old house in the middle of nowhere. But we were clearly not alone. I stood at the foot of the stairs, just staring up, willing myself the courage to go and investigate until my friends arrived and went up with me. There was no one up there. There was no way for anyone to get out a window or anything, as they were all boarded up. There was no attic for anyone to hide in. The place was completely and utterly empty. I've always been open to the idea of the paranormal, if for no other reason than the fact that I like to be scared, but that moment was the closest I've ever come to really, truly believing that it's possible. They were footsteps. I just know it. Abandoned house. So I live in Nice, Scotland, and there isn't really a big city in my surrounding areas, just many small to medium-sized towns. Naturally, we just drive around when we get bored enough. Like any other normal night, my friend texts me asking me to come out and drive for a bit, so I do. We then got so bored we decided to explore a couple of abandoned houses. The first house was fine, quite fun really. We entered through a massive hole in the wall. It generally wasn't creepy. The creepiest part about this house was when we entered the living room and there was a garden chair eerily placed in the corner. Nothing bad really. We then headed to this other abandoned house up on a hill in the middle of the woods. We arrived, and it was pitch black. We couldn't get near the entrance for a good 10 minutes because you have to walk through a sea of nettles. However, 3 of us made it inside, and our 4th waited at the car as he couldn't bear the pain of those nettles. We get in, and it seems even less creepy than the first house. We make our way through to the living room, and this is where I nearly had my first ever panic attack. I heard scurrying, and then more and more rustling. It sounded like an army of rats, and, side note, I am shit scared of rats. So I ran out of the house and met my friend at the car. I wasn't scared because I knew it was only rats and nothing paranormal. Around 15 minutes passed, and we heard our friend scream, "What the duck is that?" And we saw them run out of the house. We saw their torches. As we saw them running away, the lights from upstairs in the house were on, but I reasoned that maybe they always were. As we were getting in the car, I asked about the lights, and my friend said they never got all the way up the stairs. As they finished that sentence, I turned back to look at the lights, and as I saw them shining through the broken windows, they suddenly shut off. The car wouldn't start for a very eerie 10 seconds, which felt like an eternity. We returned there a week later during the day, and the lights were still off. Side note, there is a very, very, very low homeless population in this area, so I am certain it was not a homeless man switching the lights on and off. I was 15, bored, and dumb. I and my friends decided to make a trip to an abandoned park to hang out and goof off. It was well around 11 p.m. when I left the house, so the street lights were on, but while I was walking to the park, I heard a low, scratchy voice say, "Yunfer?" I ignored it because my town was already pretty weird, and I thought it was someone drunk looking for someone else. About 5 minutes go by, but when I look up from my phone, I see a tall, long-haired silhouette standing in front of me. The figure had to be more than 7 feet tall and was very skinny. I froze out of fear and confusion and almost didn't notice that he was holding something. The figure started to walk to me and stopped a couple of feet in front of me. The figure said, "Have you seen my son, Yunfer?" I was still frozen and still didn't answer when he suddenly lifted his hand up, but as soon as I saw that, I ran down an alleyway, a shortcut home. I ran as fast as I ever have but ended up in the middle of the same street I was just on. I saw a tree and hid behind it. I tried to call 911, but my phone was broken. Then I looked up to another tree to see the man hiding behind it, laughing to himself. Then it said, "Give him back to me, son," then lunged towards me. I passed out and woke up in my bed. I ran downstairs to my mom and sister, who were making breakfast. My mom looked concerned, asking me what was wrong, but all I said was, "Yo, Yunfer man, he was so tall and was looking for his son." My mom's face went pale. She said, "Honey, Yunfer was your dad's name. You saw him too?" This was back when I was in the last couple of years of primary school, circa 2003-2004. One day a few friends and I discovered an abandoned hut out near the estuary. It appeared to be an old club of some sort because we found some old scoreboards stacked up against the hut's wall. Naturally, at 11/12 years old, this is an exciting find, and we obviously checked to see if we could gain entry into the hut. The door was nailed shut with boards, but a friend of mine managed to pry them off, and we managed to get inside. The smell was unbelievable. Imagine the combination of mildew, excrement, urine, and dust all mixed together. It literally made us all recoil in disgust. I still remember even now I was feeling physically sick, but as children's resilience and curiosity go, we held our noses and proceeded to go right in. A tiny kitchen was the first point of entry into this hut. There were dishes so black with mold in the sink it was like a gelatinous blob of tar just oozing everywhere. There were old packets of food in the cupboard faded with age, an old fridge that still had old food in it, and all over the kitchen there was this green layer of mold over everything. It really was a revolting sight. I decided to nope out of there when a friend of mine pointed out mice and rat droppings all over the floor, big phobia, so the end of the story is relayed by my friends who remained in this putrid hut. I was outside sitting on the grass waiting for my friends to finish their gross and avid exploration when I heard a loud scream and the sound of running feet. Alarmed, I jumped to my feet and ran to the hut just as I saw my friends all fighting their way back out the door, still screaming hysterically. Someone was in there. One of my friends yelled, crying. We all screamed and took off running until we got to a public place. I waited for them to fall about laughing and say, "Gotcha." But no one did. All of them looked white and terrified. My best friend explained to me much later what had happened. According to her, the kitchen opened up to a small room that was dark because all of the windows in there were boarded up from the inside. In the gloom they could see rags on the floor and broken bits of furniture and assumed that someone had been sleeping there. Only the occupant was still there because apparently they saw something black rise up from the ground and come towards them. That's the bit I heard them screaming and saw them trying to escape back through the door. I don't know how true this is looking back, but the story and reactions of my friends seem genuine, and my best friends still mention this in our teens. The hut still exists even now, funnily enough. My backyard is a swamp, so naturally, I go exploring there. No, this isn't a joke. As a kid, I'd put my boots on and take my dog with me through the swamp and hide behind hint bushy trees so my mom couldn't see us from the deck. I remember one time when I was doing this, I was pretending my stick was a sword and was running after some mole or something and saw this weird looking guy just standing on the side of the road by the swamp, staring at me. I stopped chasing the mole, and my dog started barking at the guy. After that he just up and disappeared. This is an old story told to me from a few years ago. I was just reminded of it a couple of days back when retelling it, and I'm curious if anyone else has ever heard of this or if it was made up by the person who told me it. I used to work at a maximum security prison where I was in charge of overseeing the production of food. Not a CO by any means, and I was able to talk to the inmates very frequently. One early morning I was doing paperwork when one of the inmates was doing some sort of stalking, and we were talking about urban legends. This man was Native American, I think Navajo, but I could be wrong. He will be dubbed Storm for the sake of this story, and Storm told me about a legend and an experience he had on his reserve about some sort of devil. A devil called Hoofy. He claims there is this handsome man with a tall white cowboy hat and boots who frequently goes into casinos. He doesn't gamble, he flirts with beautiful young women and lures them out of the casino. Once he takes these women to his home, he transforms into this tall creature with shaggy goat legs and long black hair. His beautiful face turned into a mix of a demonic horse and a wolf with piercing red eyes. He devours these women and leaves their clothing around his homestead as a memento of his killings. I laughed because it sounded like a typical monster, but Storm got serious and then told me that he had a close encounter with Hoofy, and he barely made it out alive. Storm and his cousin lived in an Arizona reservation on the other side of South Mountain, very close to my hometown in Estrella Mountain. One day he and his cousin were drinking and trying to pass the time as there wasn't much to do. They decided to take a walk into the desert, just for the hell of it. Not much else to do anyway. It was about half an hour or so from sundown, so the two tread off in a direction and enjoy the scenery of the plain desert. They walk for about 15 minutes or so when they come across this abandoned church-like building. It was old and decrepit with weak wooden structures that looked as though a stiff wind could break down the church. The two walked through the church and out the back, walking through broken pews and the floor creaking with each step. They laughed about how freaky and weird this old building was before slowly making their way out. They walk out the door and jump over a trench just past the back end of the church. The pair continued to walk and laugh when they came across something strange. Storm says that he saw a wide arrangement of shoes. Muddied red high heels, black flats, torn brown pumps. An assortment of women's shoes scattered around them that were broken and dirty. Clearly abandoned for some time. Storm picked up a shoe to inspect it when he turned to his cousin. The look on his cousin's face was that of complete and utter horror. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide, close to tearing, and he was looking behind Storm. Storm was about to turn around when his cousin stopped him. "No," he whispers, placing his hands on Storm's shoulder. "Don't look up. Keep your head down, man." Frightened, Storm follows his cousin's words. He had never seen his cousin so freaked out. Then he heard it, a pair of heavy footsteps walking behind him. The sound of labored breathing matching with the steps, and Storm feels as though his whole body fell 10 degrees colder. His shoulders were shaking when his cousin pulled his hand and stepped back slowly. "We need to go." His voice was nearly lost in the heavy steps behind him, but Storm heard him just barely. "Whatever you do, don't look back," was the last thing his cousin told him before he booked it. The pair ran as fast as they could, sprinting past the old church and running to their homestead. His cousin yelled out native prayers in hopes that some sort of ancestral guardian could stop this beast. All the while Storm could hear the galloping of hooves behind them, the feeling of the creature's breathing against the back of his neck. Hot and sticky breath smelling of rotten flesh motivating him to keep running no matter how tired he got. For he knew he would be his creature's next meal if he slowed down one bit. They ran, cutting the time back to their home in half. They safely did make it back inside their home just as the sun was setting, bathing their home in a warm orange glow. Panting against the wall, Storm placed a hand over his fast-beating heart. Scared of what he might see, but he had to know, Storm stumbled to an outside window and pulled back a blind, peering out into the dusking landscape. In the direction that they came from, Storm could see the back of the creature walking away. 8-foot-tall being with long, silky black hair that reached its waist. Where human legs should be, instead was a pair of long goat-like legs with black stamping hooves that kicked up dust as it walked away. Paranormal Wall of Fear, Sausalito Bunkers. I've always been a little sensitive to paranormal stuff. I've never seen or heard a ghost, but I have had some unexplainable events. The last big experience I had was on my 15th birthday. I, my parents, my boyfriend, and 2 friends went down to the bunkers in Sausalito near San Francisco. They are old, abandoned army bunkers that date back to World War II. You can wander around them and explore the areas. On this trip, my dad found a set of doors that had been welded shut previously, pried open by someone so that you could squeeze through to get inside. My dad used to tell me stories about when he was a kid, how he used to get inside the blocks of rooms, so of course we decided to explore. After squeezing all of us past the rusty door, we walked down a hall lined with open, doorless, dark rooms. Everyone went into a pitch black room at the end of the hall and was talking about how crazy dark it was and how spooky it was, normal goofy stuff. My boyfriend and I were the last to go in. He was following me. Just 2 steps in, I felt as though I had reached a wall. My heart felt tight. Like someone had my heart in a fist and would squeeze if I tried to move forward. I couldn't push farther in, and when I tried, my heart would tighten, and it felt like I was trying to push through wet cement. It felt like someone did not want me in that room, and some force was blocking my path. An unexplainable wave of absolute terror fell over me. I have never been so inexplicably scared for my life before or since. The feelings weren't scary on their own, so all this wasn't caused by what I was feeling, the fear just washed over me. Of course my boyfriend had no idea what I was feeling, so he grabbed my shoulders, teased me about being afraid of the dark, which I most certainly was not, and started to push me further in. I screamed at him, pushed past him, and ran out of this room. My fight or flight reaction kicked in, and I ducking ran down the hall until I felt safe again. Catching up later, I told everyone what I felt. No one else felt it, and I've never felt that same way since, but Dad told me that he felt that same irrational fear one time when he had gone into a room inside the bunkers when he was in his early 20s. I've gone back multiple times over the years and can't seem to find the same place I had the experience. I was going to ask this question here because of an experience I had while exploring an abandoned property in the woods as a teen. Basically, it was abandoned, probably in the 70s. I and 2 friends got to it in '02. Besides some minor outside damage, everything inside held up surprisingly well, including windows and some left-behind furniture. We went at dusk and entered via the bulkhead because the front and back doors were dead-bolted shut still, so we explored from the basement up. The basement was a dirt floor, there were boxes full of tools and wires and nails, etc., but nothing very interesting. The first floor had dust here and there, a couch, a refrigerator in the kitchen, and old food in the cabinets. The house was still pretty well shielded from the weather outdoors. It was eerie, like being inside a regular home without power. I half expected somebody to walk around the corner casually like they lived there still. We heard footsteps upstairs, somebody actually running. It was bipedal thumps going from above and behind us to in front of us, the entire distance of the house. It slammed every single door it ran through. We were a little shaken but had weapons, so we weren't freaked out yet. We assumed it was a homeless person who we tipped off to our presence by being obnoxious teens. We all went upstairs together, calling out to whoever was there. The entire upstairs was 3 rooms separated by doorways. All 3 rooms were empty, all windows closed, and all the doors connecting the rooms were wide open. One door was hanging from a hinge. It would have been impossible to slam it shut the way we heard it slam shut. We checked the closets in each room. All empty. No apparent places for anybody to hide. No loose floorboards and no attic entry in any room or the stairwell. Every window was a total drop straight to the ground outside, and we would have heard somebody jump out a window for sure. The silence inside the house was deafening. When we cleared every entry and exit point, we all looked at each other and silently took off downstairs to get the duck out through the front door. We didn't stop running until we were back at my buddy's car. As far as I know, none of us actually told anybody else about this, and I haven't been exploring since. I'm not sure it was anything paranormal, but it was unsettling. Anyone know what this could be? A few years ago, I saw something weird in Cumming, Georgia, in someone's backyard by a small creek. It was around 4 to 5 p.m. during the fall, and everything was calm and quiet, with some birds in the background. I was with a few friends and my brother at the time. We noticed this figure, and it stood out because of how strange it looked. It was cream-colored or off-white and didn't have any facial features at all. The head looked football-shaped, but not exactly a football, more like an elongated oval, and the rest of the figure seemed pretty human-like in shape. It was around the same height or maybe a little taller than a normal person, and it had a slim build, not fat, but not overly muscular either. At first, it was just standing there, staring at some sticks on the ground. After a while, it looked up and stared at us. It didn't move or make any sound, just stood there for a bit, watching us. We ended up running away after that. I wasn't really scared at the time, just kind of confused. About a year or two later, I went back to that area with some people, and I saw it again, only this time it was closer, maybe about 150 feet away. It was still staring at us, just standing there and not doing anything else. It didn't try to approach us more quickly, but I definitely knew it was aware of us. After that, I never saw it again. I was wondering if anyone has seen anything like this before or if you might know what it could be. A pale humanoid with a football-shaped head and no facial features, just standing still and staring. The mystery of the abandoned house. A few years ago, I experienced a terrifying encounter that left an indelible mark on my memory. It was a dark and stormy night when I decided to accept my friend's dare to explore an abandoned house rumored to be haunted. We ventured through deserted streets in search of this eerie dwelling. After an extensive search, we finally discovered the house, nestled among the trees, in a state of unsettling decay. The wind howled, causing the creaking boards of the house to add an eerie soundtrack to our approach. As we entered, a palpable sense of fear enveloped us. The interior was shrouded in a chilling atmosphere and suffocating darkness. Mold covered the walls, and dust covered the decrepit furniture. Broken glass littered the floor, glinting ominously in the faint moonlight that filtered through cracked windows. It felt like stepping into a nightmare. As we cautiously explored each room, strange sounds echoed through the halls, a distant whisper, a door slamming shut, and the occasional shuffling footsteps that sent shivers down our spines. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing with an ominous presence. In one room, we discovered a flickering candle, the only source of light. Its feeble glow cast dancing shadows that seemed to take on sinister shapes. The air grew heavy with an unexplained tension, and an unidentifiable scent, like rotting wood in decay, assaulted our senses. Suddenly, a chilling gust of wind blew out the candle, plunging us into complete darkness. Panic set in as we fumbled for our flashlights, but when their beams cut through the blackness, we gasped in terror. The walls of the room were now adorned with eerie paintings that seemed to come alive before our eyes. The subjects depicted twisted figures and haunting scenes of torment. Their eyes followed our every move, and a malevolent energy filled the room. Overwhelmed by fear, we ran for the exit, desperate to escape the clutches of whatever haunted that forsaken place. The door slammed shut behind us, sealing the horrors within, but we could still hear faint whispers as we retreated. To this day, the memory of that night haunts my dreams. The abandoned house remains an unsolved mystery, leaving us wondering about the dark forces that once dwelled within its decaying walls. This spine-chilling experience taught me to heed the warnings of the supernatural and respect the unknown. Some mysteries are better left untouched, for the line between curiosity and terror can be crossed all too easily. My mom's story. Snuck into an abandoned warehouse and saw a ghost. So my mom and her friend, well, call her Wendy, drove down to an abandoned storage facility. They walked down, and there were 3 buildings.
Building A, B, and C. They examined buildings A and C, only to find them locked.
They made their way to building B, and they opened the door. It was super muddy inside, so they went home and got some boots on. They entered building B, and the door closed on them. They cracked the door open so that it was slightly ajar. They walked around and saw an apparition in the corner of their eye. It was tall and dark, it had a pitch-white face with red dots on it, they couldn't make it out. It stared at them and then disappeared. You don't have to say twice that they ran out of there super fast. Tall, white humanoid, shapeshifter? Stalking us? About 4 years ago, on It's Getting Dark pretty early fall evening around 7 p.m., my girlfriend and roommate and I were walking along some decommissioned WA train tracks surrounded by woods on both sides. We loved exploring little in-between areas, so this wasn't an uncommon event. We were about 5 miles into the tracks and woods and were considering heading back since it was getting dark quickly and none of us had a flashlight. I suddenly got this sensation of almost nausea-inducing dread and looked at both my friends who were with me and saw that they too were feeling something, wide-eyed and looking around. Let's start heading back, I declare, and they all nod in silent agreement. Mind you, we were doing just fine a second ago and do this sort of thing all the time, so this sudden onset of fear was unusual and not something that we were prepared for or used to. Just as we were turned around, we all heard a strange sound that almost sounded like quieted thunder/metal hitting metal that was coming from what sounded like off in the distance. As we whipped around to see what made the noise, a large white bird that I think was a white owl flew over our heads silently, flapping its wings and disappearing behind a tree that was roughly 25 feet behind us. We all looked at each other trying to make sense of what the hell we just heard and started walking briskly back toward civilization. We heard what sounded like twigs snapping in the woods behind us, and my girlfriend and I turned around to see what made the noise. Peeking from behind the tree the owl just flew behind was what looked like an impossibly tall, ghost white humanoid shape, with one hand on the tree trunk as it peered out from behind it. Before we could get a good look at its face, it quickly retreated back to behind the tree and was out of our sight again. My girlfriend and I looked at each other panicked. She opened her mouth to say something, and I told her, "Don't talk about it, we need to walk faster." My roommate looked at us confused and clearly scared by what I had just said, so I told her we needed to probably run home at this point, which we did. I've told a few people this story, and no one believes me. What I saw was not the owl I had seen earlier. This being had a clear ghost white hand on the tree trunk, a neck, and an upper body, and was tall. I'd say like 7 feet at least, not tall enough to reach the branches of the tree though. I wish I could have made out the face, it was just so dark that the only reason I could see it was because of how white it was. What the hell could this thing have been? Thanks for listening to my story. When I was in high school living in Seattle, ghost hunting, visiting abandoned places, was a frequent activity for us. There is a place north of Seattle called 13 Steps to Hell. The story is that a Satanic family once lived in a house where they had a cemetery deep in their backyard. These stones date back at least 100 years. The family built 13 steps into the cemetery with 2 giant pointed pillars at the top. Supposedly, each step down would give you hallucinations, you would hear and feel things, and on the final step, you would see fire, hell. The steps continue to be bulldozed because the current residents surrounding the area probably do not appreciate late-night visitors. But the steps always seem to reappear, I've seen them. Our first journey, it took us nearly 4 hours of driving and walking to find it. There are no clear directions anywhere online, at least at that time. We accidentally stumbled upon a path just as we were about to give up. It is about a mile hike deep into the woods. Along the overgrown trail, you have a lot of barriers to duck under and over, and there are random things everywhere, such as crashed cars in the middle of the woods and abandoned items as well. After 30 minutes of hiking in the creepy darkness of this overgrown forest, we were going to head back when my friend pointed to me and said, "Shit, look where you are standing." I looked down, and I was unknowingly standing between the pillars and on the first step down to the cemetery. At that point I was not going to walk down the steps, but I did explore the cemetery. My friends explored further down and started yelling and screaming. They told us to stop scaring them, even though we were at least 200 feet away from them. We left promptly after they ran up and insisted we leave. Never talked about it again. I went back 5 times after with friends who had heard, and I was the only one who knew how to get there, so I gladly took them. Nothing creepy happened on those trips. 1 year later, some friends asked me to take them. We went at midnight one evening and went there, looked around the cemetery, nothing out of the ordinary. I went down to the cemetery and rubbed one gravestone so I could read it. Some satanic symbol. We were standing in a circle debating how much longer we would stay when all of a sudden a 3-foot log came flying at us and landed in the middle of the circle. We all look around and notice that no one from the group is missing, so it wasn't any of our friends. 30 seconds later, all of this shit is flying at us. I look at them and just say, "Run." We started running back through the overgrown trail with logs, branches, rocks, etc., being thrown at us. I've never run so fast in my life. At one point my friend looks back and sees 2 giant yellow eyes after us, and all we heard were growling noises running after us, ducking under fallen trees, running through sticker bushes, and falling several times. We run to the car, get in, and drive away as fast as possible. None of us said a word to each other for at least an hour. And I have never been back since. Weird shadow werewolf thing. Alright, I haven't told many people this story, because it's kind of silly. It happened maybe 15 years ago or so. I'm going to have to describe the area for this to really make sense, so bear with me. The place I was living in was a really old house, that was haunted, but that's a story for another time, at a corner of what was the first paved road in the town and a dirt road that splits off into a paved road with a few houses along it, and on the other side of the fork stays dirt for around a quarter mile and ends at my dad's farm. In front of the house, across the road, is a set of train tracks and another road. It used to be an intersection across the tracks and a T-junction with another road, but they took out the crossing in the 70s. There are houses along one side. On the other, there is an old lot that used to be a granary and an old defunct water tower. We explored both extensively when we were kids. The granary had been demolished by the time this happened, but the water tower was still standing. At night, my side of the road was dark, but the other side was well lit by a floodlight on a big storage building. It shone on an empty lot that had a few trees in it and was overgrown with grass. There was also a street light at the intersection. It looked super creepy. My kid said she saw shadow people up there regularly. Her window faced the old intersection and lot. This happened probably around midnight or so. I decided to walk up to the 24-hour gas station to get a couple sodas. I usually cross the tracks at the old intersection instead of walking up the road in front of my house, since that avoided a small but steep hill. As I was stepping onto the tracks, I saw something move in the empty lot. It looked like it could have been a person, darting very quickly behind one of the trees. It seemed suspicious, and we do have a few meth heads around, so I stood still and waited to see if there was someone in the lot. After what felt like a very long time, but was probably only a minute or so, it moved again, then stepped out into the open. I could only see the shadow, though it looked very black, darker than the surrounding shadows. It was shaped, I swear, like the werewolf from that old Darkstalkers game. With the long crooked nose, big paws, super skinny middle, and bushy tail. It snuck across the open area to hide behind another tree. It moved in an exaggerated way, like a cartoon. I'd been surprised when I first saw it, but before I could really register it enough to feel anything close to scared, I made the connection with the shape. It just seemed ridiculous. I saw its nose poke out from behind the tree, then it leaned out, again with exaggerated movements. "I see you," I shouted. It ducked behind the tree again. I stood there for a while longer, but there was no further movement. I crossed the tracks and walked along the road by the lot. Everything seemed normal. I've seen lots of weird things, but this was just, I still don't know quite what to make of it. One night, I remember when I was 15 at my old house in Pittsburgh, I had a good friend, that I'm going to call him Trey, who was sitting in my room and playing Wii since it was the only system I had at the moment. We were playing the Wii for about 1 hour, and then Trey said, "Trey, dude, I'm getting bored, and we literally don't have anything to really play. I might just go home for the night and get ready for school tomorrow." I didn't really want my homie to go home and think I was just a boring person, so I made a quick statement and said, "Me, how about we just walk around before you go home and try to find something scary?" And surprisingly he said, "Trey, that actually sounds entertaining, so let's go do it before I go home." And I agreed, but he then said that he had to go to the bathroom before we left. I sat down on the bed, and then randomly received a sharp headache that went away. Within 2 seconds after she went away, he walked in and said, "Trey, actually, I don't have to go to the bathroom, but I did think of a cool place to explore." I just said sure, but it cannot be far, and he said that it wasn't that far from the house. But on our way out of the house, he was speed walking and trying to get out fast but in a sneaky type manner, and I thought it was funny, so I did it with him on the way out. While we were walking there, I was trying to talk to him, but he just wouldn't talk to me. I found that somewhat weird, but I just thought he had a lot on his head because he was going through stuff at the time. And after a 5-minute quiet walk, we finally reached a big empty building, and as soon as we reached it, the building started talking, saying, "Trey, okay, we are here. Let's have fun and explore." I agreed, and we found a way in through a side window. As soon as we entered the building, my body instantly received a cold shiver down my spine as if my body was screaming. After receiving that weird feeling, I've asked if he felt weird as well, and he then said with a deep and slow tone, "Trey, I don't feel anything." I instantly felt weird but didn't think much about it because I wasn't alone. I had him there with me, so what could go wrong, right? We then started walking to the staircase and had 2 options. To go up or down. I was thinking on what we should explore first, but he then said, "Trey, let's explore downstairs first. I believe it would be more fun and interesting, don't you think?" I then said, "Yeah, I guess," but on my way down the stairs, he rushed past me and then stood at the entrance at the bottom of the door and then said, with the same tone before, "Trey, are you coming?" Something in my body screamed no, and it scared me, so I told him no and that I was going home. With him saying, "Fine, suit yourself," and that he will explore the place without me. I didn't care, though. I told him right, and I will see him tomorrow, and I started to run home. I got home 2 minutes ago and was walking up my stairs to see Trey sitting on my bed saying, "All right, let's go exploring now since you're finished," as well as being weird. I was super confused about how he got to my house so fast, and also how did he get in my house without me knowing? So I asked him how he got home so fast. "You're definitely not faster than me as I last knew." And he proceeds to say, "What are you talking about? I never left, and neither have you." I was terrified and then said, "Okay, so where was I then?" And then he said, as soon as he left the bathroom, I was sitting on the bed telling him that other than exploring, we should go down and sit down and talk. He found it super weird. He said he'll sit in my room while I go down there and do what I said I was doing. I stood there in fear and also cried, and he didn't know what to do, so he walked home. I wanted to speak to my parents about it, but they didn't believe me on the first incident, so who are they to believe now? But I always sit back and think, what if I had said yes and gone down to the basement with him that day? I explored an abandoned house that still had furniture and everything. It was like the owners ran away in the middle of the night in the 60s and just left everything. Everything was old and decrepit except for a doll with ivory skin, the most beautiful doll I'd ever seen, and I was amazed that the face made of cloth still looked brand new after all those years. There was another doll next to it, but that doll looked as old as the rest of the house. Both were placed in glass boxes, and both had a thick layer of dust on them. This was in Japan, by the way, just cool, unusual dolls that I knew would fetch a good penny back home. I took both dolls home and some coins that were no longer in circulation, and after a few days, I started hearing someone whistling when I was supposed to be alone. I would turn around and swear I saw something from the corner of my eye before it would disappear. Months went by, and I started waking up at night hearing pots and pans in the kitchen slamming together, even what sounded like a can rolling on the ground. I'd go into the kitchen and see nothing out of place. I also started getting a weird feeling that I was being watched in the kitchen and another area of the house, and I also felt like the doll was watching me. It all sounds crazy, I know. The final straw was when, after another night of banging in the kitchen, I woke up to find the front door that opened up to the kitchen propped open. Later that same day, I confided in a new friend that I'd been having strange things happen in my apartment. She asked if it was in the kitchen and in another room. I thought I was going crazy, but she knew the two rooms without me telling her, so I felt there might actually be something evil inhabiting my home after all. She said she had some psychic abilities and could sense something dark in those rooms but didn't want to scare me, so she wasn't going to say anything until I brought it up. She taught me how to exorcise my place, and I'm telling you, it felt like a new home the next morning. The air was lighter, and the lighting was brighter. No more weird sounds or feelings of being watched either. I also happened to throw away the doll just in case it was the cause for something coming into my apartment. We all want a thrill, and the chase is all fun until you actually find what you're looking for, and shit gets real. Ghost hunting with my brother. This happened about 5 years ago. I was 19 then, and I'm now 24. There is an abandoned house that sits roughly 100 feet to the right of my grandparents' house. It has been abandoned for the better part of 45 years. Well, it's quite old and dilapidated. It's basically what you'd picture a haunted house looking like. My older brother and I used to get stoned and want to do things that we'd be way too scared to do sober. Hence, why we decided to ghost hunt in this house. It was about 2:45 a.m. in the middle of July, and we had just gotten done smoking. I looked at my brother and said, "You know what would be fun? If we went next door and tried to get some ghost recordings." He replied, "Shit, I'm game," and we grabbed our phones and walked next door. The door of the house is never locked. We've been in it during the day before, but never at night. There is one of those old-timey large iron bar screen doors, then the main house door. We left the main door open in case we needed to get out in a hurry but closed the iron screen door behind us. We started asking the usual questions like, "Is anyone there? And can you give us a sign?" We both had recorders on our phones running. After about 45 minutes of complete silence other than us trying to scare each other, we started hearing taps coming from the basement that progressively got louder and closer to the bottom of the staircase that leads to the basement. In our stone minds we decided it would be a good idea to walk over to the top of said staircase and listen closer. As we stood there, a mass, darker than dark, crept around the corner of the landing at the bottom. My brother and I were frozen, too scared to move. The figure stood there for what seemed like an hour but couldn't have been more than a few seconds. It looked up at us, and it had no features at all, it was just black. The figure darted up the stairs at us like a missile, but before it hit us, it disappeared. A blast of cold air went straight through us, almost knocking us over and seemingly snapping us out of the paralyzing fear. We both bolted towards the door. We tried to go out the iron screen door, but no matter how hard we pushed or kicked it, it wouldn't open. It was like something was holding it shut. I got completely fed up with it, and I kicked out the window to the left of the door. My brother and I did a sort of dive out of the window and basically flew back over to our grandparents' house. With our hearts still racing, we looked out the window towards the house, and there was a gigantic creature standing in the window of the abandoned house, staring straight at us. The creature backed up and into the darkness away from the moonlight illuminating the window and was gone. To this day my brother and I won't even walk past that house. We always take the longer way around that leads to the other side of our grandparents' property. I still to this day get goosebumps just thinking about it. The black-eyed man out for a stroll, in the middle of nowhere. My cousin and I had a very weird experience in September 2011. We both lived in the town of Wolverine, Michigan, and our dads are brothers. My cousin and I have been hunting and camping together since we were 12 years old. We're 2 months apart in age. We had graduated from high school that spring and planned to go camping later in the summer. We finally got permission to use my dad's pop-up camper and headed off. We planned to stay a week or so at a place southwest of Mackinac City in the forest near the state park. We drove back into the woods about 4 miles off the main road and set up in a small clearing. We both thought the area looked familiar but could not recall when we had been there. It was weird because we both commented at the same time to each other. We really didn't have much planned to do other than be together and hike the area. Both of us were going to move away from home the next spring, so we didn't know when we'd see each other again. I'll be honest, the camping trip was a good excuse to get away from my girlfriend for a while. We didn't do much that first night other than drink a few beers and talk. We were in our racks early that night. The next morning we decided to explore the area. We started about 10 a.m. and headed west towards the lake. We had been walking no more than an hour when we heard somebody yelling ahead of us. It didn't sound like they were in trouble, so we cautiously continued walking towards the sound. After 10 minutes or so, the yelling stopped, and we never saw anyone. I had a GPS with me, so I figured we'd be able to find our way back pretty easily. We did get crossed up a few times, but we got back to the campsite in the late afternoon. There was a small creek nearby, so we washed up and started cooking dinner. As we sat to eat, there was the sound of something moving through the trees north of us. There were a lot of small animals in the area, so I figured that's what it was. A few minutes later we heard thrashing sounds, like something was sweeping at small trees and bushes. Since we were eating, I thought maybe a black bear got wind of our food. Whatever it was, it soon stopped, but every once in a while it would start up again. That night we could hear the sweeping sound coming from the same area, which really seemed odd to us. The next morning it was quiet, so we walked in the direction of the noise from the previous night. We didn't see anything, but it did look like something had been kicking up the ground in a few places. We walked back to the campsite and started to eat breakfast. I just wanted coffee, so I went into the pop-up and searched for a coffee cup. As I was in there, I heard my cousin say something. I asked what he wanted. He replied that I had better get out there. I looked through the netting, and there was a tall man with a black tracksuit standing at the edge of the clearing. I stepped out and asked the man if we could help him. He smiled and said, "Maybe I can help you." My cousin and I both looked at each other and kind of laughed. The man started to slowly walk towards us, and I asked what he wanted. He stopped walking and was about 15 feet from us. Right away I noticed that his eyes were totally black and that the tracksuit had caked mud and dirt on it. I asked who he was. He smiled and said, "I'm just walking and meeting people." By this time I was freaked out, and my cousin walked towards the pop-up. I knew he was going to grab his shotgun. The man got a serious look on his face, like he sensed we were alarmed, so he turned and walked towards the woods. At the edge of the clearing he stopped and turned around and said, "I'll be seeing you boys later," and started to laugh as he moved towards the woods. We didn't need another confrontation like that, so we gathered everything and hauled ourselves out of there. We did set up in another area about 70 miles south of there, and we had an enjoyable couple of days. But when we get together, we still wonder aloud who the weird black-eyed man was. El Paso High School Ghost. I graduated from El Paso High School in 2011 and only went back when my little brother graduated. What I saw and experienced at that school made me never want to return. For reference, this school is very, very old. It was built in 1916 and was even used as a makeshift morgue for those affected by the Spanish flu outbreak. The morgue is in the basement of the building, under the theater classroom. The basement was mostly closed off with the exception of the boiler room and the storage room. There's also this long pathway with a short ceiling that leads to closed-off rooms. One of those rooms is a perfectly preserved classroom that was abandoned, and no one knows why. If you can get a light through, you can see notebooks, lunchboxes, and pencils, just all on the desks. It's like everyone just got up and left. With all that negative energy, it's bound to bubble up, and it has. Teachers and faculty would tell stories of feeling cold and seeing things they weren't sure were there. It sounded like a load of BS at first, but the school has photographic evidence of its ghosts. There are stories of tragic accidents, and even people using a Ouija board in the basement. I saw something one day that made me believe it all. I was a theater kid back then. I used to get all kinds of crap for not being in football because I was a 6 feet 7 inches juggernaut, but whatever. The theater is where I like to be. When I was a senior, I had a lot of free classes, so I spent most of my time in the theater or the theater classroom. Hell, I even ate lunch on the stage most days. Sometimes I had a few friends join me, but I was alone a lot of the time. Mostly by choice. One day at lunch I went into the theater, turned on the lights, pulled out my mangled lunch from my backpack, and started eating. I didn't have mobile data at the time, and I didn't know what the school Wi-Fi password was, so I was listening to music on my iPod Touch. As soon as a song ends, I hear a loud crash above me that sounds like someone fell over with a box full of silverware. I look up at the catwalk of the theater, and I see someone looking down at me. I don't know who they are, so I wave and ask if they're okay. No response. I stand up and ask louder, but still no response. This person looks like they're right on the edge of the catwalk too, like their torso is fully visible. They're wearing this dress that looks like something you'd wear to prom in the 80s. It's like puffy. I breathe in and start to ask again, but what happened made me sprint out of that theater. This person fades into nothing. Like they just became less and less visible until they weren't there anymore. A cold sweat hit me, my armpits just felt wet, and I farted. I grabbed my backpack and ran my giant ass out of that theater. I tried telling my friends what happened, but they just laughed and told me to shut up. I only ever went back into that theater with someone with me, and even then I had chills, and I always felt like I was being watched. I've been to this old abandoned Greyhound, the dog, racetrack. Sadly, they have since demolished it. It was so creepy because there were still all of these cages where they kept the dogs until the race. The entrance of the place was a circle-shaped tunnel, so it just felt off when you would walk through it to the main part of the building. When a group of friends and I had gone, as soon as we walked into the main building, there was a chair in the dead center of this open area that had rope and what appeared to be dried blood all over the chair and ground. Could have been something someone set up to scare people, but creepy nonetheless. It didn't help that we went at night. When I was a child, I went to Croatia every year for the summer holidays to visit my family. We have a house near Makarska, and there I became friends with the children, to this day. There was a tradition among the young people that they would go up the mountain. It is more of a mountain range than a single mountain. There is a large pasture and an abandoned house, where shepherds used to stay overnight when they were looking after the sheep, or something. The way to the abandoned house is not that difficult or very dangerous, except in one place where you have to walk a bit along a cliff. It is more of a kind of ravine/crack. It is difficult to explain, which goes down several meters, and on the ground are large boulders. I and 3 other friends decided to go there. On the way we passed the house of another friend. His name is Ivica. We saw him on the terrace and asked if he wanted to come with us. He said yeah, and so we set off. Everything was normal until the part with the cliff. Ivica was behind us when suddenly he started screaming. We have never heard a scream like that before, a death scream that still haunts us today, and then we saw him fall down, this indescribable death scream, and the silence after the impact. We were in a state of shock. We had just seen one of our best friends fall to his death in a death scream that went right to our bones and souls. Ivica doesn't react, it is too deep for us to climb down, so we ran back to the village in panic to get help. At that time there were no smartphones, only the good old Nokias. We ran, cried, screamed, and finally we saw the first houses. The house of Ivica and his parents was the first house when you come down the mountain. When we passed Ivica's house, we saw his parents and Ivica. We looked at him, out of breath, pale, and with our eyes open. We couldn't believe it. We all saw him falling to his death a few minutes ago. We thought he was messing with us, but you can't imitate something like that, falling so far and letting out such a terrible death scream. But even if so, how could he get there so quickly without a scratch? He and his parents saw us and came up to us and asked what was wrong with us. We explained to them what had just happened. The adults in the village knew us. We never told or made up such stories, but above all, they could see that we had just experienced something terrible. All the adults didn't hesitate and immediately went to the cliff. It could have been someone else, a tourist, another child, or locals. But after a long search, no one was found. While we experienced this scream and watched him die, Ivica was, at this time/moment, shopping with his parents. To this day, people in the village still talk about it, and the 4 of us who experienced it can never forget these images and especially the scream of death. That was the only time something like that happened to me or the others. Nothing like that ever happened before or after that. If it were just me, I would write it off as some kind of imagination/fantasy, but since my other friends were there too, I know that I didn't make it up in my head. Ivica is fine, but the 4 of us can never forget this day. It feels like we lost Ivica that day. We don't believe in the paranormal, but we can't explain what happened that day. And that death scream, it was so terrible. I just wanted to share it so that others who have experienced something similar can also report about it. I wish you all a nice day/evening. When I was 15, I and 3 other girls snuck into an abandoned mansion kind of far into the woods. It used to be a novitiate and was doorless, windowless, and mostly cement. It was 3 stories with 2 staircases connecting the floors. We walked to one staircase, and as we were approaching it, we saw something move at the base of the stairs going into the basement. It was fast, and it was big, human big. The only thing is, the basement steps had been tipped sideways, and all other entrances were blocked off by cement. To this day I still don't know what it was. I never went back. My story as an urban explorer. I was seeing some of my family in Germany. But within my week and a half of being there, I got to explore some pretty cool sites. One of which I'll get into in this entry. My great aunt and uncle live in the city of Freiburg, Germany. Freiburg hugs the German Alps, and the Black Forest snakes its way to and fro in the city. Now, if you don't know anything about the Black Forest, the first thing I will explain is that the Black Forest is a forest that you do not want to get lost in. The wood is ancient, with groves and hollows dating back to before medieval times. But one of the cool things is that there are all kinds of ruins, dating back to at least the early 12th century. So, after reading on some of the old ruins that had been discovered, I decided that I wanted to go and check out some of these old ruins. So after stocking up on water, a map that detailed most of the trails that led into the German Alps, and a little drunk on excitement, and some craft German ale, I set out. After an hour or 2 of wandering along the trails, I found something interesting. A trail that had not yet been mapped. It led, at least based on what I guessed, straight to the mountain range. So, after taking this trail, I made it to the base of a towering mountainside. And, built into it, was a scene straight out of Lord of the Rings. A church was carved directly into the side of the mountain. A church, however, is an understatement. It was almost like a cathedral. Massive wooden doors at least 12 feet high stood ominously facing out to the forest. I stood in absolute amazement, as I shivered in such excitement that I bolted to the doors and stared up at the intricate carvings chiseled into the mountain stone. God damn it, I still regret not bringing my camera to take pictures of this gorgeous piece of architecture. I looked around the cut archways that gave some view into the structure. I had to climb up a little, maybe 6 or so feet, to get a wonderful view of the interior. It was just as intricately carved as the exterior. I found a good spot to climb up further, giving myself the ability to get my feet onto the cutout arch and climb in. I hit the floor and flicked on my flashlight and started shining it around the interior of the church. The archway stood tall, maybe 20 feet tall and 15 feet wide. I walked down the center of the church, and that's when I found it. Easily the coolest thing I have ever seen. A massive stone sarcophagus, 8 feet long and 5 feet wide. Tall candlesticks stood at each corner, hardened melted wax trailing down all the way to the floor. On top of the stone coffin lid, decorated ornately, was a Templar cross. Like the one from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. At this point, I'm trembling in absolute excitement. This place hasn't been touched by human hands in at least 1,000 years. I circled the area on the map and made absolutely sure that next time, I would bring my camera. I took one last, memorable look at the area before I hiked back out of the window and made it back to my aunt and uncle's by nightfall. There are some who may think, oh, Holt, you are such bullshit. Buddy, let me tell you what, writing this down, reminiscing on the grand structure that I came across, I get tingly goosebumps of absolute excitement just thinking about it. Several friends and I encountered a floating, sparkly speck of white light deep in an abandoned train tunnel. Near Stevens Pass, Washington, there is a 2.6-mile long abandoned train tunnel, rumored to be haunted by victims of a deadly avalanche in 1910. About 100 people perished. Around 15 years ago, our circle of friends had a renegade dance party in the tunnel, which we did about once a year for several years. The tunnel was part of a trail system, but after a partial collapse, the entrance is now blocked off. At some point, we'd always venture away from the party and walk into the pitch-black tunnel a mile or more before heading back. On this night, several of us walked deep into the tunnel, which runs under a mountain. We walked in almost complete darkness, using a dim red flashlight to let our eyes fully dilate. Randomly and suddenly, a small flicker of soft white light, about the size of a teardrop, sparkled and shimmered gently while calmly floating in the space just a few feet in front of and above us. The conversations abruptly stopped. After a beat, someone said, "What's that?" And a couple of WTFs were said. 2 or 3 times it disappeared for a second then reappeared a few feet over. We were all just flabbergasted, staring at the floating speck of brilliance. Someone started to panic and wanted to skedaddle back the way we came. I said, "What are you?" to the sparkle but received no reply. After the brief moment passed, the sparkle was gone, and that was that. Our small group of friends contained all the types, a couple of woo types, a few skeptical types, and a few moderates like myself, some totally sober, some high, some stoned, but nobody was ducked up. We all agreed we saw something roughly matching my recollection, and that we didn't know what in the ever-living duck that was. It remains the most paranormal thing I've ever seen. Thanks for listening. My encounter with a shadow person. Shadow person, wanted to throw this out first as there isn't much concerning the one I saw. Back in the 80s I was a deputy sheriff and was working the night shift in the jail, many floors to the jail. I was on the 6th floor, that night. I was making my rounds through the west wing. We had 3 wings per floor, west, north, and east. TVs were off, they weren't in the cells and were controlled by us. We turned them off after Magnum Pie was over, which came on after the late news, and the inmates were all asleep, as best as I could tell. I was alone on this floor, which was normal. As I walked by the large cell, held up to 20 people, I stopped in my tracks. It was dead silent, nothing but me was moving, but I saw a black shape, human in form, walking. I saw them reflected in the mirror, not real glass, mind you, but we had them in the big cells. Inmates did have to dress for court and such. This was mainly a pretrial jail. I am 52 now, and this, along with some other things, I still remember clearly. The mirror was to the right of where I was walking, near the toilet and sink and to the back of the cell. I hurried up and finished my rounds, still had the other 2 wings to walk through and check on people. This thing was as clear as day, though. I have never seen anything like it since. Oh, and I used to work in the courthouse. There are lots of ghost stories about that place. I don't know what shadow people are, and I hadn't, that I recall, heard of such a thing before. It wasn't until years later, when listening to Art Bell, that I realized what it was. To me it was just a ghost at the time, but nothing like what I had thought a ghost would be like. When I was 17, I and some friends were exploring an abandoned juvenile detention center from the 80s or 90s. We had been there tons of times before, but this was the first time we decided to go into a certain building. The building was pretty normal on the upper level, but I remember the lower level was something like a bathroom with lots of lockers and a ceiling between 5 and 6 feet. It was here that I took some pictures of 2 friends, and all of them had a huge glowing orb in the left side of the picture. It was a weird place overall, and seeing the pictures all have that weird orb in them was completely unexplainable. I live in Pennsylvania. Near me, in Schuylkill County, lies a place known as Frog Hollow. We all heard stories about the place when I was a teenager. Kids would go out to drink beer and hang out. It's owned by the Garden Club or Historical Society or something. It's this house in the middle of the woods. It has a stream that goes by on one side. This house is really old. Never had electricity. When we first got there was an old ironwood stove. I can't imagine how much that weighed, but eventually someone removed it. It consisted of 3 rooms on the bottom floor. Small rooms. One looked like an eating area with a fireplace, the kitchen, which had that stove and some kind of wheel mechanism on wood and some cabinets, and another empty room. The stairs were in the middle of the house between the eating area and the empty room. Upstairs were 2 rooms. One had a wooden bunk bed type thing, and the other was empty. The area above the eating area was actually a balcony that you could look down from. And last there were some stairs to the attic. Also outside was a basement, but it was all dirt basically with just some stairs under the house. No bathroom. I don't remember an outhouse either. So the first night we went looking for this place, we bought some new flashlights and batteries. We were in the woods for God knows how long trying to find this damn house. There were 4 of us. Me, 2 other girls, and a dude. At one point, both the girls scream. They claim they saw a ball of light just floating through the woods towards them. I didn't see it though, so I didn't really believe it. We finally find this place, and as we're walking up to the house, our flashlights flicker off. We had 2. First it was only mine, but then the other one started too. If we stopped away from the house, they would turn back on. We were debating on if we wanted to go in or not, and it ended up only being me and the dude who went in. We made it into the fireplace room first, then the kitchen, then the empty room. The empty room's floor was caving in, so we avoided that room from that point on. Then we heard scratching. I panicked, and we both kind of rushed out. Didn't think it was a ghost, just didn't want to face an animal. Also, our flashlights kept flickering randomly the whole time we were there. After that night, though, we went back there all the time. We started taking an audio recorder and a video camera. One day we were walking in, and it was frigid out. I and one other person felt this warm air just surround us. It was my first real spooky moment besides the flickering flashlights. Trying to cut this short now. Sorry. We had so many voices recorded. I know that sounds absurd, but really. A lot. It was a guy's voice mostly. He sounded frustrated most of the time. He would say things like shut up. Get out, go to hell, things like that. On occasion there was a woman's voice. The most creepy ones from here were me making a comment about how the closet upstairs felt weird. I said it feels like someone is in there, and you just hear this lady go, you're right. Another time downstairs, we said your cliché, where are you at? Or something, and we just got a voice saying, I'm standing right behind you. The two most scary experiences there were once we went with only girls. We got there, and there were like 5 of us. We just heard these loud stomping feet upstairs. So much so we thought it was people, and we left. And we waited, and no one ever came out. So we waited for our dude friend to come, and we went back. No more footsteps, and I never heard them again. The other one was possibly the only time I saw something. We were all downstairs getting ready to leave. I looked over on the stairs and just saw this shadow of a person peeking its head out of the stairway. I just watched it and didn't say anything because I really thought my eyes weren't focusing correctly. Then our dude friend yelled. He saw it too, and it was gone in a split second. I calmed everyone down and said it was probably just one of our shadows. I swear I tried to recreate that shadow, but the only way I could was standing on the stairs. And trust me, no one was standing on those stairs on their own. They were all too scared. I have more stories, but this is so long already. But even those woods were weird. I really think there was just something about that patch of land. I actually have a note from the garden club asking about the history of it. One woman killed herself near that land on a bridge, and another woman was ended as well. It was a farm at one point in the early 1900s. Eventually some kids ruined it by trashing the place with garbage, though, and they also posted a sign saying the place isn't haunted and to not go inside. Also, supposedly there are cameras hooked up. I just wonder if they're fake or not. I was urban exploring in the old candle factory on East 9th Street in Columbus, Ohio, and digging up the same old stuff, note cards, some sheet music, chairs of various sizes and shapes, when I heard a hooting sound echoing from elsewhere in the building. Naturally, I assumed it was an owl, and I hooted back, hoot hoot. Just to be funny. The sound stopped, and I continued my exploration. Then, from the hallway, hoo. Ho-oo. But closer. I paused and hooted back, hoot hoot. It was starting to be a little weird, but I continued, doing a little bit of graffiti, candle flames, writing candles suck, etc., and then the sound came again. Hoo. Ho-oo. I froze. It was close this time. Slowly, afraid to make a sound, I turned around, and a man was standing in the doorway. As if he sensed me, he hooted again, 15 feet from me, standing in a pile of lead paint chips at the threshold to the candle room I was in. Ho-oh-oo. He started to walk into the room toward me, and after a few paces, in the dim light, I saw that he had no eyes. His face had sunken eye sockets, but there was just skin. I stood motionless, and no more than 8 feet away from me, he hooted. Ho-oh-oh-oh-oh. It turned out he was using echolocation to navigate through the candle factory. He was looking for old candles, and the sound reflects differently off of candle wax, but it really scared me. How I and 2 friends could have died. I am 14, and my 2 friends are 13, one Jake and one Tom. The story took place down the road from me a few months ago, and I'm still frightened to go there. So there is a huge abandoned mill down the road from me with a massive mansion just sat next to it, with both being surprisingly abandoned, the mansion abandoned not so long ago. But the building I will be talking about is the mill. So in the UK, around wintertime, it gets dark quite early, so I and my friends thought it would be a great idea to go to this mill in the pitch black. So it was around 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., and we set off. The walk there wasn't so bad, actually. Tom was bragging about how he wouldn't be scared and how he would knock out whoever tried to scare us. Then Jake, the more paranoid one, was saying he didn't want to go inside. So we arrived at the building. It's only a 10 or so minute walk there anyway. We slid through the fence to get in and walked across the huge field. So before I start to get in, you have to climb up massive scaffolding, which takes around 5 minutes, and it is extremely loud. So we were at the top of the scaffolding, and I heard what I thought were voices. But me being me, I brushed it off as pigeons. We walked around to one side of the building where a room kids call the dead room is, as there is what seems like blood all over the floor. We climbed to the top floor from the scaffolding and jumped onto the rotting wooden floorboards. To get down a floor we had to climb down some very unstable stairs. Tom stepped on one, and his foot fell through. That spooked us all a lot, but we kept going. We came across a huge piece of machinery that looked amazing. But what caught us off guard was the noises we were hearing from the floor below. Sounded almost like footsteps, human footsteps. Us being stupid, we kept going. In my opinion, this is the scary part. We walked silently down 2 flights of stairs to the bottom floor, aka where the so-called dead room is. We walked through a door, and I heard the footsteps again. I and Jake both looked at each other as if he heard it too. Tom ushered us into the room as he entered first. We were about 5 minutes into that room when Jake suddenly shouted, "Guys, ducking run." So we followed. When we got to the top floor, we argued with him as we thought he was only blushing. But about 5 seconds after we finished arguing, 2 men, around 6 feet 5 and 6 feet 1, emerged from the staircase. The terrifying part is one of the men had a huge butcher's knife and what looked like a dead cat in his other arm. At that point I rushed round to the front of the building and jumped down from the 2nd level, spraining my ankle. I heard Tom running behind me, but Jake wasn't with him. When we were around 2 or 3 streets away, we stopped running, and I bombarded Tom with questions as to where Jake is. His only reply was, "I don't know." I called Jake around 3 times before I got an answer. I heard his voice on the other end. "Hello?" He whispered, "Yes, Jake, where are you?" "Jake, I'm in the mansion, those ducking guys chased me in there." "Me, don't worry, I'm coming to get you." "Tom, are you ducking insane? Call the police, or something." At that point I heard voices on the other end of the phone. "Where is the little shit? Duck this man, I'm going." That's all I could make out, the rest was just gibberish. I heard Jake sobbing on the other end, and he isn't the one to cry. I heard a door slam on the other end, and Jake started to FaceTime me. He walked out of the room, down the stairs, and out of the house. We saw him jumping the fence and running towards us. We reported it to the police the following day, but sadly, they never caught those 2 guys. To the 2 guys in the abandoned mill, let's not meet ever again. Abandoned school. This happened to me and a group of friends in the fall of 2005. We were really into checking out old abandoned buildings and such. Well, being this is pretty illegal, we often did this late at night with less chance of being caught. Well, one night we decided to check out this old abandoned high school that I had read about online. The school had partially burned down in 1926, killing several students, and then was rebuilt to only suffer another fire in 1955. The school closes its door after this. We are super amped to check this place out and drive for 2 hours to get there. We drive up this tiny, curvy road up a large hill. The school is ominous against the wooded backdrop. The whole place was just dark and eerie. I snapped a picture of the looming building with my flip phone. The picture was awful. All sorts of floating spots/orbs in it. I just assumed it was the bad camera on my phone. Throughout the entire night, we all took photos on our phones. Some were just of what we saw, and others had these floating spots/orbs. I even took pics with a disposable camera, and when I had the pictures developed later, they were the same. Even odder is if we matched up our phone pictures with the physical pictures, when the spots/orbs appeared matched in both. The night was fairly uneventful. We walked through the school and walked the grounds. Nothing jumped out at us, no creaking or moaning. Just an overall creepy vibe and very, very cold in the building, like the air conditioner was on full blast. The only odd event was when we were in the stairwell of the school. I pulled out a cigarette and went to light it with my lighter. My lighter wouldn't light. Okay, no big deal. We all smoked, and there were 4 of us. My friend took out his lighter to light it for me. His didn't work either. Okay, odd but most likely a coincidence. Both of my other friends take out their lighters, and they won't work either. Weird. Mind you, on the way there, all of our lighters worked. Also keep in mind that the stairwell is where the pictures showed the most of these spots/orbs. After we leave, we're pretty bummed that nothing crazy spooky happened. My friend goes to light a cigarette, and his lighter that didn't work earlier works with no issues. So we all pull ours out and try. What do you know? They all work with no issues. I really can't explain what happened there with any of it. But the whole thing still gives me creepy vibes thinking back on it. I later learned that the stairwell we were in when our lighters wouldn't work is where the first fire was started. Security night shift at abandoned hospital. Hey everyone, I've got a recent experience I wanted to share from working a night shift at an abandoned hospital that I'm still trying to make sense of. Despite being a skeptic, something happened that made me quit right after, and I can't shake the eerie feeling. On this particular night, my coworker had called in sick, leaving me alone to man the place. Other than that, everything was business as usual until later into my shift. I heard a faint mechanical noise coming from the basement. My initial reaction was to brush it off as some old pipes or maybe a draft causing something to rattle down there. I felt compelled to check it out, even though I was mentally chalking it up to some mundane explanation. As I made my way down the stairs, the noise suddenly stopped. Now, I won't lie, I hesitated for a moment before I proceeded further. It wasn't fear, just that odd feeling you get when things don't quite add up. I entered the basement, and right away, that unsettling vibe hit me. I spotted a room filled with shelves, stacked with a bunch of cardboard boxes with documents inside. I walked around the room, doing my job and investigating the noise. That's when things took a twist. As I was looking around, I felt a sudden rush behind me. It felt like someone had walked by behind me. I don't know how to explain it, but the chill that ran down my spine was unmistakable. I just stood there and didn't turn around. In that moment, I felt an urge to get out of there, not necessarily because I was convinced it was paranormal, but because it was so inexplicable. And as I headed to the exit, another strange thing occurred. The door, which I had left open when I entered, slammed shut. It wasn't some gentle push of air that closed it, it felt deliberate. So here I am, sharing this experience with you all. Was it truly paranormal? Was it just a series of odd coincidences, or perhaps an encounter with a trespasser? I honestly can't say for sure. If it was a person, I didn't hear any steps or movement. This incident was enough for me to quit that job. I am curious to hear your thoughts on this. So this happened around 5 or 6 years ago. I live in Perth, Western Australia. I and my best friend lived in the same suburb at the time. We were underage, so when it came to weekends, we usually just went exploring around parks and the quarry in our neighborhood. It was late at night, and we were still just wandering the streets near our house doing whatever we were doing. We dared ourselves to go into the quarry at night, which is pitch black and surrounded by bushland. It's a decent-sized area, bigger than a football field. We chickened out at the entrance, and I decided to sit on a rock just outside the quarry while we were chatting. So just to give you an idea of my position, my back was facing the bushes and the quarry, and I was facing forward toward my friend, talking to her. Her face suddenly went blank mid-conversation, and she just froze up for a few seconds before sprinting off and yelling at me to run after her. I had no idea what was going on, but I ended up booking it. Honestly, I thought it was some sort of human threat, like a dodgy person. We ran like 2 streets down before she managed to stop, and I couldn't get her to talk for a few minutes. She was absolutely terrified. She told me that when she was talking to me, a face appeared just to the left of my shoulder, probably around 1 meter back and coming from the bushes. She couldn't really see if there was a body, but she just described the face. She said it was just evil and had this menacing presence that she couldn't describe. I can't get her to accurately describe what she saw, but she says that it was like the features weren't defined. She says that the eyes were blackened out, and she thinks that it was grinning on its face. Ducking terrifying. Whispers in the abandoned house, a paranormal encounter. We had always been warned about the abandoned house at the end of the street. The locals said it was cursed and that no one should enter. But curiosity and the desire for adventure took hold of me and my friends one summer night. We decided to explore the house, unaware that this night would change our lives forever. There were 5 of us, me, Carla, a 20-year-old girl, along with my friends Tom, Laura, Nick, and Sophie. We armed ourselves with flashlights and courage and headed towards the ominous house. The full moon lit our path, giving the night an even more mysterious air. When we arrived, the front door creaked as it opened, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. The air inside the house was cold and heavy, and a sense of unease took over us. We decided to start on the ground floor. The walls were covered in mold and dust, and the furniture was destroyed, as if someone had left the house in a hurry. Suddenly, we heard a whisper. I thought it was Sophie joking, but when I looked at her, her face was pale and her eyes were full of fear. The whispers grew louder and seemed to come from all directions. "Did you hear that?" Nick asked, trying to stay calm. I nodded, my heart pounding. We decided to keep exploring, thinking it might just be the wind. We climbed the stairs, which creaked under our feet. When we reached the 2nd floor, we found a closed door. Something told me we had to enter, so I pushed the door, and it opened with a deafening creak. The room was empty, except for an old mirror on the wall. We approached, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw something that chilled my blood. Reflected in the mirror, alongside us, were dark figures, almost imperceptible. I screamed and stepped back, bumping into Tom. "What's wrong?" he asked, scared. "In the mirror. There's someone else," I whispered. My friends looked and indeed saw the same figures. Suddenly, one of the figures moved and stepped out of the mirror, materializing in front of us. It was a woman with an old-fashioned look, with empty eyes and a deeply sad expression. She reached out to us, and her ghostly voice asked for help. "Free me," she whispered. Laura, trying to stay composed, asked, "How can we help you?" The figure pointed to a box in the corner of the room. Inside the box, we found an old diary. Reading it, we discovered that the woman had been a former resident, unjustly accused of witchcraft and locked in the house, where she eventually perished. Her spirit had been trapped, seeking justice and peace. We decided to perform a small ceremony, reciting some words we found in the diary. As we did, the figure began to fade, but before she left, she smiled and thanked us. The house seemed to become lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. We quickly left without looking back. Since then, the house no longer feels as sinister. Although the experience left us marked, we know we helped a tormented spirit find peace. That night, we learned that some legends have a basis in truth and that curiosity can lead us to unforgettable, though terrifying, experiences. My dad used to work on a naval base that probably hadn't had any new buildings since the early 20th century. All the buildings had just been gutted and given shinier equipment. He worked in what was the old hospital but is now the health inspector's office. As cliché as it sounds, he and all his fellow soldiers were really wary of the old hallway. It led to a small portion of the hospital that never had new equipment put in. Walking through the hallway was really like stepping back in time. One night, my dad asked if I wanted to go check it out, so we drove over and started walking around the old hospital, and we heard things we couldn't explain. At first, the footsteps I kept hearing behind us didn't bother me because we passed by one of his soldiers when we were walking in. She was leaving for the night, so I thought it could have been her. My dad, before I could say anything, called her, and she was already out of the building. Security was tight on the base, so I wondered if it was an MP coming to ask us to leave. Nothing ever happened, though. It was strange, but I didn't give it much thought. My dad said going to work the next day was weird, though, because they started hearing a lot more sounds coming from across the old hallway. He said that it never stopped. Things just got worse after we went in there. While part of me thinks my dad made it all up, I definitely heard something in there. And they never ended up doing anything with that building. So I don't know. It definitely made me more intrigued with urban exploring, though. For my first real experience, it was super cool. I haven't experienced anything scary or paranormal in any abandoned places. Though I've only visited a couple and always during the day. My mom used to be super into Ouija boards, and we would play with them a lot as kids. Frequent events in my house included doors opening and closing by themselves. Light bulbs being unscrewed from their sockets. If you stood at the top of the basement stairs, you could sometimes hear someone breathe in your ear. That was one of the worst things. The books on my bookshelf once flew straight across the room and onto my bed. A knife from the knife block once popped straight up and fell into the sink. As kids we found this kind of stuff pretty entertaining. We stopped playing the Ouija board when my ponytail got grabbed and swung enough for everyone in the room to see it. We had some paranormal investigators come, and they said it was one of the most active houses they had visited. They let us stay for the investigation, and the voice recorder kept saying my name. Stuff doesn't really happen anymore now that my mom moved out. One day, my then friend, now girlfriend, and I were walking home to her house. We didn't live in the same neighborhood, but I had a pretty good idea of the makeup of it because I rode my bike to her house a lot and pretty much took a different route each time. Anyways, as we were walking, we saw a black Suburban with heavily tinted windows pass us going down the street, then they passed us again going up the street, then once more going down, then finally back up. We didn't think much of it because the person driving the SUV probably was lost or trying to find an address, which was also understandable because the neighborhood was very hilly and poorly laid out. We went about 4 minutes without seeing the SUV anywhere until we saw it at the intersection directly in front of us, parked with hazard lights on. We passed it, not really drawing too much attention toward it but still getting some weird vibes from it. As we were walking, it started driving pretty much right next to us. I was worried, so I took my phone from my pocket to call my mom, saying that I would stay a little longer at my friend's house. Right as I took my phone out of my pocket, the SUV instantly got on the gas and took off. I honestly think I saved our lives that day. The old abandoned chapel. 20 years ago, I was in Decatur, Illinois for a family wedding. It was nice to see my brothers again since I lived in Texas. If you've ever been to Decatur, then you know how little there is to do there. One night, Derek, Buck, their friends and myself were outside spraying pools of off. into our hands and lighting it on fire. Everyone is allowed to be in their early 20s once. Bored, my brother Derek suggested we go visit this old church that was abandoned around 70 years ago. It was supposed to be haunted and it sounded like fun. All of us thought it was a great idea. We would make a night of it with some beer, some weed, and their new DVD player. So we got everything together and hopped into the Suburban. It was a cold, clear night. The snow embankments gleamed against the black highway in the headlights. Slowly, the highway turned into backcountry roads that turned into winding one-lane paths. We listened to the classic rock station until it turned into static. Then we began to tell stories from our childhoods, making each other laugh as we got high, not even noticing the forest that had crept up around us. After about 2 hours of driving, we finally arrived at our destination. Across an open field covered in snow maybe 100 yards away sat an old abandoned chapel, bathed in pale moonlight. The roof had long ago collapsed. Much of the stonework was crumbling. One stained glass window remained. Everything looked cold and gray. Next to the small and lonely chapel lay the cemetery. The broken and weathered tombstones made it look every bit of 200 years old. There was really no way of knowing for sure without walking up to them through the stinging wind. All of our bravado on the way there turned into silence as we sat parked along the side of the dirt road. Everything was surrounded by thick pines that morphed into an inky black, separating us from outside world. What seemed like no more than 5 minutes just sitting in the Suburban and watching out the windows, a small, round, blue light appeared from out of nowhere. It looked ethereal, translucent, and opaque at the same time. Alone, it floated above the old graveyard, seemingly unaffected by the wind. One by one, more of them slowly appeared until the air above the graveyard was filled with them, some swaying together, others appearing to move of their own accord. It was both beautiful and ghostly. Each of us began to feel the swell of fear fill our chests, saying very little to each other now. Then, in the middle of the swarm, a single red orb shimmered into existence, perhaps from beyond the veil. Whether the sudden heavy atmosphere of evil was real or imagined, terror now clutched at all of us except for my brother, Derek. He was determined to get out for a closer look. We pulled him back inside of the car as he barely opened the door. There was no way that we were staying there 1 second longer. As one might expect, the person in the driver's seat was having a hard time starting the car through the sheer panic. We were just going to smoke a couple of joints and walk around a bit, hoping that something might happen but knowing that nothing would. None of us expected this. The first turn of the key, nothing. The second turn of the key, the engine tried to turn over. Finally, the car came to life on the third try. Our fear and panic slowly subsided the further away we got from that place. Sometimes, I think about that cold, dark night. How much of it really happened the way we all remember? Just the other day I asked my brother Buck about it. He said that it still gives him chills. Fortunately, I live in Texas, far away from the cold winds of Decatur, Illinois. Every now and then, I wonder what would happen if I went back to that old abandoned chapel. Would it be empty and lifeless? Would something similar happen again? Would it even still be there? Once when I was younger, 10 to 11 years old maybe, my parents hosted a Girl Scout sleepover. There were about 7 or 8 of us total, and we were all pretty close friends at the time. For context, my house is right next to a small section of forest. The nearest neighbors are a retired couple about a quarter mile from the incident. We're the only people who regularly walk in the woods even to this day, as it's around an undeveloped part of town, just out of city limits. We went into the woods for a fun little walk as a group. It was my mom and all of us rowdy kids. At the time I had a good friend, let's call her Kay, and I was a little shit who liked to scare people. When we were returning from our walk right around sunset, I thought it'd be hilarious to leave my friend in the woods and let her think she was lost. She wasn't familiar with these woods, but there's no wildlife or harsh terrain that would hurt her. No harm, no foul, right? Wrong. As soon as everyone else had left, it was just me and Kay. She had lagged behind to look at something, so I took the opportunity to sprint out of the woods. I heard her scream my name when she realized I'd left, and then I heard the most blood-curdling scream. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like she was being murdered. I can't describe it accurately after 15-ish years, but it was horrifying, and it was unmistakably Kay's voice. Easily one of the top 5 scariest sounds I've ever heard. I ran back in there and got her, because while I was a little shit, I also didn't want my friends to get hurt. She looked terrified but was physically fine. We started walking back, and she didn't say anything until we got back to the road. She turned to me with a haunted look in her eyes and asked, "Why were you screaming?" We both thought the other person was screaming, which was bad enough. The thing is, nobody else in the group heard it. Half a dozen girls, plus my mom, had no idea what we were talking about. Neither of us brought it up again. I and Kay are no longer in contact, and I've since heard more screams in the woods since that night. Sometimes it was a guy's voice. That awful sound made my blood run cold every single time. Never found a source, never got confirmation that anyone else heard. It's been at least a decade since I've heard anything, and I don't know if there was actually anything to begin with. I like to think it was just a fox because I don't think I can stomach the thought of something else making those sounds. I was the night watchman at an abandoned mental hospital turned state park for a summer in college. The only creepy thing that happened was one night I was with one of the state park police, and we saw flashlights in one of the buildings. Kids constantly broke in, and other people broke in to gut the old buildings for any copper they could find. So as I was saying, one night we saw flashlights moving around, so we went in. The officer pulled her gun and flashlight, and in we went. We could hear her footsteps on the floor above us, and we slowly and quietly went upstairs. We checked every room and found nothing. Then we heard footsteps above us again. This happened for a few floors until we were on the top floor, below the roof. We heard footsteps up on the roof, so we went up there. Still nothing. We never found anyone or any indication that they had been there. It was friggin' creepy. The creepy teenager and the abandoned car. I was walking my dogs in the woods. I saw an old abandoned car in the woods. The tail lights looked like a style from the 60s. I don't remember seeing this car here. I walk the trails daily. I started approaching the car, but I got a creepy feeling, so I turned around and went back on the trail. As I was walking away, I was wondering if someone was killed during the crash. The car looks like it was in an accident. It would be cool to investigate near the car. I get back onto the path and walk maybe 5 feet. I look up, there is a teenager wearing a green starter jacket. Like the ones from the late 80s, early 90s. I wasn't expecting to see anyone, so I screamed and said hello. Sorry about that. He waved. He was standing in the woods between myself and the car. One thing I found odd, my dogs didn't notice him. They are hunting dogs and love people. When I screamed, the dogs stopped and looked at me. But never noticed him. There is no way teenagers nowadays would get caught wearing such outdated clothing. The abandoned house. One sunny day in the mid-spring, 3 of us were bored and decided to go exploring. We headed down an old canyon road that's pretty popular amongst us locals. Once we parked, we started walking along a relatively flat old dirt road, overgrown by the long green grass. There were lots of ladybugs. There must have been millions of them, all flying towards us as we were walking along. As we walked along, we noticed an old abandoned house just a little ways off the path, surrounded and covered by oak trees. The small, rectangular, dilapidated house had one of those old wood shingled roofs, featuring much of the same for the siding. The house looked to be from the 20s or 30s era, with an old outhouse in the back. When we stepped up the 2 or 3 rotten stairs into the house, we were greeted by an old sofa and armchair across from a really cool old brick fireplace. In the bedrooms, we found old metal bed frames and mattress springs and such. The kitchen still had its old cabinetry with its doors hanging off the rusted hinges. We split up to go explore the house and take pics and to just generally poke around a little more. All of a sudden, we heard a loud thump that seemed to come from everywhere all at once. We all hurried out of the house at the same time and met up outside. As we gathered outside, we exchanged a look of disbelief. We sat outside and smoked a little while, calming down and chatting. It was a beautiful day out, 70s with chirping birds and chattering insects. As we sat in the overgrown, wispy grass, amongst the green lupins, we decided that we were idiots and we just heard a tree branch hit the house or something. So, we headed back inside to explore more, and I ended up sitting by myself in one of the condemned bedrooms. I decided to smoke and take a minute to chill. I was leaning back against the wall opposite an old rusted out mattress and frame, with my eyes closed, zoning out. But then, all of a sudden, there were 3 loud thumps. They hit so hard, I felt it in my back that was against the wall. Dazed, I sat up and didn't know what to do until I heard my 2 friends talking excitedly from outside. I darted out of the dilapidated front door toward my friends. As I finally got to them, we all just stared at each other with confusion. As I absent-mindedly rubbed the spot on my back that was against the wall, I exclaimed, "What the F? How the hell should we know?" One of my friends retorted, "Like we said, it's just a freaking tree branch or something." We all sat down, feeling defeated by the spooky old house. But yet, once again we all ended up heading back inside so our friend could finish taking some pictures. My friend and I hung out in the living room with the old, dilapidated brick fireplace. We checked it out to see if maybe we could find an old stash spot behind one of the bricks or something. We were busy with this for a while until we both looked up and realized that it was starting to get dark outside. We looked at each other, and we were all like, what the F happened to our buddy? So we start calling out for him and going room to room looking for him. We finally found him sitting outside smoking in what once was a flower garden, still sprinkled with daffodils here and there, amongst the tall grass. Dude, didn't you hear us calling you? You're only like 50 feet away from the house. No, I was actually out here calling you guys. We all just thought it was weird we didn't hear each other. After smoking some more, we all decided to start walking the 1.5 miles back to the car. Just as we're all standing up and gathering our stuff to leave, we all hear it at once. We hear the distorted sound of one of those old rotary telephones ringing. It sounded like it was coming from the house where the living room would be. We all stood there, frozen in place, looking at each other with wide eyes. Naturally, my friend who had been taking the pics was all, shit, I must have left my camera inside the old house. After a couple of minutes of arguing over who was going to go get it, we all just decided to go back in together. When we were back inside again, we realized it was getting pretty dark inside, so we told him to hurry up. I stayed back in the forlorn living room while they went off looking. As I was standing there waiting for them, I thought I heard a soft rustling sound coming from the ancient brick fireplace behind me. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there, so I just figured it was maybe settling or there was a critter or something. Just as I turned back around to walk towards where my friends were, a freaking brick from the fireplace went smashing into the wall right in front of me. Of course, I screamed top notch and went running outside, screaming to my friends to get the hell out of there. When my two friends finally came outside, they looked at me confused and asked, "What did you, get a spider on you or something?" I relayed to them what happened, but they didn't fully believe me at first. When I was practically crying trying to convince them, they finally relented. We all agreed that that old house for sure felt really creepy. So, we all three quietly began making our way back to the old dirt road and out of there. On our way out, my backpack strap came loose, and as I took it off and set it down to fix it, I happened to glance up and back toward the old house, and I saw what looked to be a dim, flickering light that appeared to be candlelight in the main living room window that was facing us. I excitedly told my two friends to look, and they saw it too. In the end, back at the car, we all just figured that maybe it was a homeless person living there or something. But, then again, I know I was completely alone in that living room, there was nowhere for anyone to hide by that fireplace. And what about the distorted sound of that old telephone ringing? The incident I want to share with you today happened in 1993. Even after all these years, I am just as frightened today as I was then. I have never publicly spoken about this or written about this for fear of my safety. It has tormented my thoughts and dreams, and it has made me afraid of the dark and given me anxiety. The big question of who and why still remains unanswered. In a small farming community bordering Mexico and Arizona with a population of a bit over 5,000, there is not a lot to do. No mall at this time, no skate parks, not even a movie theater. On this particular day the weather was beautiful, sunny, and cool, and I did not want to be stuck at home all day, so I drove my mom to work in a nearby town and promised to be on time to pick her up from work at 5 p.m. She reminded me not to smoke in her car, and I drove away heading back home. I ate breakfast and took a nap. About noon I picked up a friend, and we drove around town for a while, then went to the store and purchased something cold to drink and a pack of cigarettes. We drove around and talked the usual girl talk and the latest gossip we shared with each other. When I grew sick of circling the same roads and hitting the same potholes, I headed out of town a couple of miles for a change of scenery. Traveling on a familiar road I slowed down when I realized that I had driven past the road I usually would take back to town. I always made a point not to go too far because the paved roads turn into dirt roads, and it's no place for a family car, but I said, what the heck? I will just take the next road instead of turning around. We both scoped out the unfamiliar area. A huge eucalyptus tree and a house of some kind I had never noticed. The closer we drove, it appeared to be abandoned with the door flung open and windows busted out. Nothing at all about places like this appealed to me, but my friend is shouting, "Pull over there now." And I am trying to talk her out of it, saying, "No way, we are stopping. I do not like places like that." She is nagging, "Let's see what they left when they moved." Realizing that she was not going to shut up, I reluctantly slowed down and turned into the overgrown driveway. She jumps out to curiously look inside the house. I turn off the car and get out to smoke a cigarette. I yell to her to hurry, I will be waiting by the car. She calls me a chicken shit. I don't care. I finish my smoke, pacing back and forth, anxious to leave. I noticed how overgrown with weeds and brush the yard had become over what looked like many years left unattended. I wander around a bit, checking out what little was left of this old, beat-up wooden trellis with dead, thorny branches all twisted and woven through it. A glimpse of animal fur caught my attention, and I looked closer and noticed what appeared to be a dead coyote was hanging from one of the many branches. Dried blood dripped from it, and it looked as though it had been there a while. Gross. After a little more observation, as I am already stepping backwards towards the car, I realize there are numerous other similar carcasses sprawled here and there or hanging from branches also. Some were pelts and others were the entire animal. I got the creeps with all these dead eyes staring at me. I had seen enough. I yell, "Let's go now." I jump in the car and yell again. "Get in, or I am leaving you." My friend comes running out wondering what was wrong. I point to the coyote skins. She screams also, "Let's get the out of here." We drove back to town quietly and didn't say much. I dropped her off at her house and had just enough time to stop by my house and brush the grass out of my hair and the dust off of me before I picked my mom up, so I hurried. Gosh, what an unusual day it had been. My mom stood outside her office, she smiled and got into the car. Obviously, she had not been waiting long. We go to Costco and pick up some groceries. She made the mistake of telling me to get a card also. I loaded it up with what I thought our household needed, and we met at the register. "We are never doing this again," she said as she wrote a $300 check. After arriving home, we put away the groceries, and I took a long shower, dried my hair, and dressed to go out for the evening. I fed my dog and told my mom, "Bye, I won't be out too late." I drove away in a very dusty and dirty Volvo. After the country roads we traveled earlier today, it really could have used a wash. Maybe tomorrow, Saturday. I could have used my phone at home, but I had the habit of stopping by this small grocery store a block from home to use the pay phone next to the store. It was very close to the road, and if I parked it close enough, I could talk on the phone from my car. Few people had cell phones at this time. I planned to call the same friend I was with earlier. We had made unclear plans of possibly going to visit her cousin. I started to dial her number when from the mirror I noticed a pickup truck coming up behind me at a high rate of speed. I stared at it in the mirror, realizing at the last minute this truck was not slowing down. With my car already running, I dropped the phone receiver, leaving it swaying back and forth from the short cord. I slammed it into drive with the accelerator pressed, trying to avoid being struck from behind. I quickly sped away. Why would this driver want to hit my car? It was obvious that this was exactly what was intended, considering there were no other cars on the road. He had to drive far left to the shoulder of the road to purposely get behind my parked vehicle. If unintentional, why didn't he slow down? He never even slowed down. Now he is on my tail again, and there is a stop sign coming up. I do not want to drive through it, but this guy in this large pickup, the kind used to tow an RV, is inches from my car. If I chose to stop or even slow down, he would ram the back of my car. Giving me whiplash is not the only damage he intended to do, and I am certain he is trying to make me wreck and then kill me. Why? At one point I drove past my friend's house. She looked confused as I didn't stop to pick her up as planned. Instead I sped past with a cloud of dust and a white Chevrolet truck extremely close and viciously trying to plow into me. With no other choice, I raced through the intersection, almost closing my eyes, fearing another car or pedestrian might cross my path. This maniac is still no farther away. I buckle my seat belt and sit up straight. I drove like my life depended on it. Turning corners, managing to not hit a parked car or lamppost. Using only the gas pedal and seldom the brake, I reached speeds up to 80 miles an hour on residential streets trying to get away from this psycho. With some good driving and determination, I managed to lose the SOB driving by my friend's house again. I saw she was still standing outside. I slowed down, keeping an eye out for the crazy person with a lead foot and anger issues. She quickly hopped in, and not wasting any time, I drove away. We didn't talk. I was shaking. I needed to stay focused on driving. In a town this small, he probably wasn't too far away. It probably wasn't over. Finally, I saw a police car, and I hoped he would pull me over for speeding, but that didn't happen. I knew with what I had been through tonight I needed to tell the police. So I waved out my window for the officer to stop. When he did, I frantically told him about the truck and asked him to stay close by so he could help me because any moment he would be back to terrorize us again. The officer turned to me and jokingly said, "Why don't you go home and get some sleep?" I slowly drove away feeling tired, helpless, and now teary-eyed. Wishing I could do just that. Go home and sleep. I spot the truck again as he drives through the intersection ahead of me as if searching the block, hunting us down. I hear his engine roar as it gains speed heading towards us again. I start to cry thinking this night keeps getting worse and about what the cop said. My friend says, stay strong and just drive like you did earlier." I took a deep breath and gained some much needed confidence. My car was still running strong and not getting hot. I knew I could do this. Hopefully, I would know who and why. I drove around for what seemed like hours. I knew I probably could lose him if I headed out of town, where I could drive faster, but I was afraid if he managed to run me off the road, I knew he would kill us. It appeared to perhaps be over as the frustrated driver chose to turn off and disappear out of town. Still watching cautiously, I saw it was safe to finally unclench my hands from the steering wheel and slow down to a safe speed. We drove to my house, quickly got out, and ran inside where it was safe. Even though it was late, my mom was waiting for me, immediately asking me what kind of trouble I had gotten myself into. I wanted to tell her about the danger I was in tonight, but I was too physically and mentally exhausted. I just sat there breathing heavily. With a very serious but also fearful tone, my mother insists I go outside and look at my father's car. I tiptoe carefully outside to the driveway. Stretched out on the hood of Dad's car was a taxidermy quality black coyote staring back at me. Never mind the who and why. My cousins live in a swamp area in a neighborhood near a big city. I was exploring the swamp area with my siblings and cousins one afternoon in the summer. We spotted an alligator and instinctively walked by it, leaving it in peace. As you should. We weren't scared, it was just resting and didn't want anything to do with us. Until one of my cousins didn't. Oh no. He decided to approach the gator and throw a stick at its face. This angered the alligator, and it began to go after him. He got away, only because the alligator had to go up a pretty steep ditch, and I don't think it cared too much to leave the side of the lake. What's unexplainable is why he did that. I never understood why he did that, neither then nor now. Creepy because we know how fast those creatures are and what damage could have been done that day if the alligator actually cared to chase him up that ditch. Plus the mud will swallow up your shoes and slow you down if you move too fast. So much could have gone wrong. Sometimes man-made lakes are put in ditches to catch the rainwater. That way the neighborhood won't flood. For all of you that don't live in swamps, that's why there is a ditch. The abandoned rural house. Hi there, I am from a town near Cordoba, Argentina. I'm 20 years old, so this story happened about 8 or 9 years ago. I was raised by my mother and a stepfather, and they bought a field, and me and my father built a house there. The field already had a house, which was abandoned for a long time. I don't know how long, but it didn't have windows or doors. It was what we called a rancho. It was a very long house, like rectangular shaped and low ceiling. It was divided half and half. There was half the house that had rooms connected to one another and to a main hall, and the other half. This hall was perfect to skate in, since in the field I couldn't because of dirt roads. It was very spacious, and I liked to go there and skate. The house had 4 rooms connected to each other and to the hall, a kitchen and a bathroom, to the side of the hall, but this story begins in the farthest room to the right, a medium-sized room with a window to the hall. It was summer, lots of heat and humidity. I was playing with my sister and one of her friends. I was a bartender, giving drinks to them from the window to the hall. They went out for a few minutes, and I smelled it. It was the smell of a rotting corpse coming from my right. There were 2 rooms to that side. I got curious and walked to the room next to the one I was in. The smell was stronger, and I started looking around to see if I could find the source of it, maybe a dead rat or bat. The room was small and had a window to the outside. I looked outside, but the smell was gone there, so I knew it was inside. Then I turned into the next room, where the smell was stronger. I will give an idea of how this room was. It was a big room, rectangular also, painted in red. It had 2 windows, one to the outside in one of the long walls and another to the outside in one of the shorter walls. It also had 2 doors, one in one of the long walls to the hallway, opposite to the window, and one to the room I was in, which was in the farthest left corner of that wall. So I entered the room. The smell was intense, and I knew it was from something bigger than a rat. Since it was very strong, I got into the room, and as soon as I went through the door, something to my right caught my eye. There was a dog there, in the right corner next to me. The dog was lying in the ground, with its head gently lying in the wall. It had its stomach open, and guts and blood were all over the floor next to it. It was kind of a German Shepherd, with some mixture of a mixed dog, but overall a medium to large dog, hurt in the corner. 2 thoughts came into my mind. I was terrified. This happened in like 10 seconds in total. I thought that some pumas might have attacked the dog, which could be bad, and the other one was how I didn't see it before. I was in the house the day before, and the dog wasn't there, and it was clearly rotten, and that takes time, more than a day at least. The blood was dried, and the flesh was dark, like when it's really old. And then I looked at the face of it. It didn't have eyes, but they were open, and I was invaded with this feeling. I knew that it was looking at me, studying me, watching every move I made, like piercing to me. My danger alarm spiked, and adrenaline and fear kicked in. I ran to my sister and her friend, who was outside, and went to my house running. I told my stepdad, who kind of got worried, and we went to see, but when we entered the room, there was nothing there, not even any trace of smell or blood. My dad laughed and never believed me, and to this day I sometimes think it was my imagination, but the memory is vivid. I can remember the smell, and I don't know if my mind can play with me like that. P.S. A family moved to that house to fix it. Years later, they reported some creepy stories too. Overall, it was a scary experience. I don't know if it was a ghost or what. I've read later that rotten corpse smell was a signal of an evil spirit, but I don't know. Whatever I saw in this abandoned house followed me home. Not long ago I was out with a few friends on a little late-night excursion. We didn't have much to do, so while driving, we threw out ideas back and forth. Eventually someone brought up an abandoned house not far from our little suburban community. We all knew about the house, since back in middle school kids spread paranormal rumors about their experiences inside it, which led to kids going to it and being let down as the building was completely boarded up with no way inside. My friends and I would walk by it frequently back then, as it was a shortcut through the middle of two communities. I still use the same shortcut to this day while out on runs/walks. Before this point I had never been closer than 10 feet from the house, never really showing any interest in it. To get to the house by car, you had to pull off the main road onto a dirt road that went on for a while, with the house being off this dirt road just about a half-mile down. We decided to park the car on the dirt road since there are multiple steep dips that lead into sandbanks that seemed risky to navigate at night with the type of car my friend had. Our plan was to look around the house and probably smoke a quick bowl before returning to the car and leaving. As we approached the property on foot, my friend Jay pointed out that there was a car parked ahead of us. As we got closer we noticed how bad of shape the car was in. Rusting exterior, flat tires, and busted windows. It obviously has not moved in a very long time, yet I had no recollection of it ever being there. The part of the property we were on was a part of the shortcut I mentioned earlier, and I had passed the same spot just days prior to this while on a run. As for the car model itself, it looked particularly old. I'm not a car guy by any means, so I don't know what it was specifically. But it looked like it was from the 70s. We took peeks of the inside only to find no one, which was to be expected because who would be in a car as run down as this? Anyway, we continued past the car casually without mention of its odd placement. Who knows what goes down in the desert? After a few moments we were startled by the sound of an engine starting and the sight of bright headlights shining behind us. Our first instinct was to book it, all running toward the abandoned house in a panic. I remember this part vividly as there were comical aspects to it.
The group of friends I was with had about 7 people, consisting of my friends Z, J, Jay's sister, 2 random girls Jay picked up, F, and me.
So as we ran, I looked to my side to see Jay running at full speed, only for him to run into a fence post. Uh-oh, man down. I kept going, pretty much accepting his death. I turned my gaze to my other side, where I could now see Jay's sister running. Funnily enough, she tripped and fell as well. It was like the last scene of an intense horror film, where everyone is picked off one by one. Jay and his sister managed to regain their composure and catch up to us, looking back to see where the car went. There was no sign of it, no headlights or sound, nothing, as if it was never there. We weren't running long, and the path we were on was quite narrow. Turning around to get on the road would have taken a lot longer. We all had a good and brief laugh about Jay and his sister eating shit during such an intense moment. Though we were all a little uneasy about what had just happened. Finally, through our panic-fueled sprinting, we had reached the entrance of the house. The door was boarded, as was expected. We decided to look around the outside of the house to find a nice and spooky place to smoke, because where else would you rather be to consume drugs? As we walk around the outside of the house, F spots a hole in one of the boards big enough to fit a person through. A way in.
J, F, and I all had the same idea.
Let's smoke inside the creepy house. The 2 random girls straight up dipped at this point, saying they'll just go back and wait in the car, Jay's sister following them. Z was a little uneasy, but we ended up roping him in with us. One by one, we each squeezed through the hole and into the house. Once inside, I realized just why the house had been boarded up. There was rat shit everywhere, along with fallen debris from the crumbling interior. At that point, I was mostly worried about stepping on a nail or angering a sentient mutant rat or some shit. Little did I know that I should have been worried about something a lot more sinister. The room that we had entered through appeared to be a bedroom. We glanced around with our flashlights curiously, debating if we should just stay in that room and smoke or explore further. Mr. Steelballs J insisted that we go further, so we cautiously agreed to do so. Before we left the room, I caught a glimpse of some graffiti. I can't remember exactly what it read, but it had something to do with a girl. Under it was a spray-painted human silhouette that looked like a shadow, along with another silhouette painted out next to it that was in the shape of a small stuffed bear. Seeing that, along with the other satanic messages spray-painted around it, made me feel very uneasy. As we shuffled carefully into a hallway, I glanced at the time on my phone. It had just struck midnight. Before I could even look up from my screen, there was a sudden loud crash that sounded like it came from the other end of the house. We were naturally drawn toward it, turning around and heading the opposite way down the hall. We quickly reached a front room with a fireplace and countertop. A door was practically impaled by the corner of the counter, making us conclude that was what had fallen. Beyond the door was a bathroom and another bedroom. As my friends inspected the door, I saw something from the corner of my eye in the bathroom ahead. I quickly shined my light in there, seeing something standing in the bathtub. It was really tall. My best guess is that it was at least 8 or 9 feet, having to hunch over just to fit inside the tub. Its body was deformed, like it was drawn by a blind Parkinson's patient. Its head was tilted, staring directly at us. The instant I got a look at it with my light, my phone shut off abruptly, along with my friends' phones, leaving us in the dark. We all freak out, scrambling around trying to find our way out as fast as possible. All I remember from this moment was a lot of yelling and screaming and things being knocked over in our effort to escape. We quickly realized we'd probably hurt ourselves running around this house in the complete dark, so we huddled together, trying desperately to turn our phones back on to get light. There were sounds of things rustling in the debris around us along with loud scratching above us. After a few moments, one of us finally managed to hit the power button on their phone to get the blue light intro screen to appear, giving us a sliver of light. It was enough to guide our way and get us the hell out of there. We managed to escape through the same tiny hole as before, sprinting back toward Jay's car, hightailing it the duck out of there. The next few hours were quite uneventful. After we had gotten over the craziness of the situation we were just in, the night got pretty boring once again. Around 3 is when we decided to start dropping everyone off and call it a night. That's when I started seeing it again. The same tall figure watching me from a distance. At first I swore my mind was just playing tricks on me, so I kept it to myself. When we got to the house the 2 girls were staying at, I saw it again, much closer this time. It seemed like it was just a few feet from the window I was looking out of. Once we drove away, I brought it up to Jay and Z, who were the only 2 left in the car aside from Jay's sister, who was asleep in the back. They told me it was probably nothing, which I really wanted to believe. I kind of believed it for a moment. Jay pulled up to Z's house, Z hopping out of the car and heading inside, leaving just me and Jay. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It read 3:30. Jay started heading to my house, which wasn't far from Z's. We pulled up to a stop sign, and suddenly I saw it again. But this time, so could Jay. He was the one to point it out first. The figure was pretty obvious, as it stood directly under a streetlight. We stayed at a complete stop and stared for a while. I then noticed the digital clock on the dashboard start to change, going from 3:33 to 0 o'clock. I pointed it out to Jay, making us both look down at the clock. As we look back up, the figure is gone. The car suddenly stalls, and Jay has to turn it on again to continue driving. Now we were both terrified. Jay dropped me off, and I spent the rest of that night on my computer, wanting to completely forget what had happened. But whatever I saw wasn't anywhere near done with me yet. This was only the beginning. Abandoned hospital. My mom was VP of our local hospital, and when the hospital was purchased and made public, they got a brand new hospital built for them. The main priority on move day was obviously getting all the clients to the new hospital safely and the equipment and medicine. The old hospital was locked after that, but was still being used as storage so staff could go back and get less important items over time. Only 3 people had access to the hospital, key and security code for alarm, and my mom was one of them. If someone had to return to the old hospital for something, they had to be attended by one of the 3 key holders. So my mom told me in the beginning it didn't feel too weird, it just felt like being in an empty building. But the longer it was abandoned, the weirder stuff started happening. When she had to visit the site with the VP over construction, a big storm had hit and damaged the roof over ICU, so they had to investigate the damage. My mom went to her old office first because she was like, well, since I'm here, I may as well grab a few items that are still left behind. She heard music playing down the hall when she left and just assumed her colleague was on the same floor and wanted noise to be less freaked out. He hated going there. She went to the 5th floor, sight of the damage, and her colleague was there, so she asked if he had just come from the ground floor as well, and he said, "No, why? I came directly to the 5th floor." Like I said, this building was heavily alarmed, and only 2 other colleagues had access with my mom already there, and the alarm resets once you've entered the building, so if one of the others had come, it would have triggered the alarm again before disarming it, so there was definitely no one in the building with them. I asked my mom if I could go with her the next time she had to visit, which was soon, so she could let the construction team in, and here are a few things I experienced directly. Only the generator to the building was on, full electricity was cut off, but room lights would turn on by themselves as you walked by. Phones that were disconnected would ring as you walked by offices. The nurse's station help pad that patients would buzz from their room rang as well, and the ringing would follow us, as in stop ringing on one side of the wing and start ringing on the other once you got closer to a different nursing station. Patient call lights would turn on as you walked by rooms. These were the lights the patients operated from their beds, no beds and no other light switch to operate them. The pharmacy alarm was just constantly going off, and there was no way to stop it. The construction guys were, of course, freaked out and wanted to make sure electricity was actually cut off before they started working because of all the lights and alarms, and my mom was like, "Yep, I can show you." They said that was going to be the quickest job they ever completed. And the reason for fixing an abandoned building is, like I said, still using it for storage and not wanting rodents getting in through the hole in the ceiling. Other stuff happened, but this is long, and I think y'all get the gist. Women in white. When I was a kid, it was me, my sister, her friend Veronica, and Veronica's little brother Isaiah. We were all hanging out outside when all the power in the neighborhood went out, and about 20 minutes later, that's when the sun went down. My parents and their parents were still at work, and they were paying my older brother to babysit us. He was 16 at the time, so he wouldn't have babysat us unless he got paid to do it. Anyway, as we're hanging out, my older brother points to the abandoned 2-story house that's directly in front of our house and says, "Hey, do you guys see that woman in the 2nd floor foyer window?" As we looked up, there was this woman in an all-white dress that appeared to be facing our direction. We couldn't see her face, however, because it was almost pitch black. The only thing that was giving us light to see was my neighbor's house. He had lit up about maybe 10 to 20 candles and lived directly next to us, so it had provided us enough light to see the woman's dress and figure but not her face. My older brother, being the instigator that he was, dared all of us to go inside the house to go talk to her. At the time we were 9 and 12. My sister and Veronica were both the same age, while I and Isaiah were also the same age. Trying to prove ourselves to my cool older brother, we accepted the dare. We brought a giant flashlight with us that my dad kept around in a hurricane kit and proceeded to make our way to the abandoned house. I was 9 years old, and I was a bit terrified and unsure that I wanted to do this, but after watching how courageous everyone else was willing to be, I decided to continue on. Opening the door, we immediately noticed that the house was completely run down on the inside despite the outside being well taken care of. The paint on the walls was moldy and chipping, the wooden floors looked cracked and rotted, and there was a moist smell in the air that was somewhat unbearable to breathe, but nevertheless we still went on our way. We made it up to the 2nd floor when all of a sudden we heard a giant creak coming from behind the walls. I start to tell everyone that the woman isn't in here and that we should leave. This was actually a front because I was extremely terrified of the environment alone and sensed danger was coming, but to no avail. Everyone wants to continue on. As we make a turn and enter the foyer, we see absolutely nothing but a towel hanging over a railing that overlooked the 1st floor, so I calmed down immediately. I even grabbed the towel and threw it down to the 1st floor. As we're leaving, however, we hear this blood-curdling scream come from a different room in the house that sounded like someone managed to scream while choking and gurgling at the same time. I guess it was loud enough for even my brother to hear because he ends up running over and kicking the door in while screaming at us to come down the stairs and to leave the house. As we look back at the house, the woman is no longer there, and my brother proceeds to tell us that after I threw that towel, the lady in white simply walked right past me but knew something was up when we didn't react to it. 13 years later I found out that the woman in the white dress was apparently a ghost that haunts countryside areas and maybe a victim of murder, which was a result of betrayal by a husband/lover. Don't explore abandoned houses, you might not make it back out. I've kept this story hidden inside me since it happened. I and the people involved, we never told anyone about this experience. We promised each other we wouldn't tell our parents, for fear of getting in trouble. Also, we were certain no one would believe us. No, I won't tell you where this is. No one should go to this place. I will never share its location. That's why I won't even tell you what state this happened in. I don't want any of you trying to Google it and find anything about it. I grew up in the Midwest, and I don't know if anyone outside of the Midwest knows this, But there are a lot of haunted old homes, buildings, etc. Just look at some of those investigation shows, like Ghost Hunters and the like. The town I lived in was surrounded by farming land, especially cornfields. Really small town, and you'd always see a lot of abandoned, crumbling apart houses, barns, and other such things. I grew up in a family that absolutely loves horror movies. I learned quickly that I had to not be scared of it and remember, it's just a movie, it's fake. By the time I was about 8 or 9 years old, I was desensitized and could handle them. That's what happens when your mom had you watching horror movies since you were a toddler, I guess. Growing up, all my friends knew this about our family. My mother used to let us have small get-togethers with friends every Halloween. We would watch scary movies and stuff after coming back from trick-or-treating, and every year without fail, she'd do some secret prank that terrified all of our friends. I grew up very interested in the paranormal and things that couldn't be explained. Partially because of the things I've seen that I can't explain. But I wasn't stupid. My mother taught my sisters and me to never touch a Ouija board, to never try to communicate with anything, that it was too dangerous. When I was 16, a couple of my friends invited me to hang out with them, with no context of what we were doing. They picked me up, and we took off, driving into the countryside. We drove for almost an hour, and then they suddenly pulled off to the side of the road. Confused, I looked around. "Why are you stopping? Does someone have to pee?" They laughed, unbuckling their seatbelts. "No, we're here." I looked around, seeing we were surrounded by cornfields. I said, staring at them, waiting for them to say they were joking. "Don't worry, just get out and follow us." "Are you about to kill me and bury me in a cornfield?" I half joked. "You're crazy," they laughed. "No, we wanted you to come somewhere with us." Okay, I said, warily. They led me through the field that had previously grown corn but had already been harvested for the season. I could think of a handful of horror movies that warned me not to go walking around in the middle of nowhere. My friends kept leading me along until we reached the tree line. Guys. This isn't funny. Where are we going?" "Don't worry, it should be right up here," they pointed, a few 100 feet away. Surrounded by overgrown grass and trees lay a decrepit old farmhouse. "What the hell?" I said to them. They smiled eagerly. "We heard that this house is like super haunted. And we know you aren't scared of horror movies or creepy stuff, so we thought you wouldn't be scared to go in with us." "You expect me to go in there? That place looks like it will fall down if you breathe on it. You're ducking crazy. I'm not going to die in the middle of nowhere in a duck and haunted barn. You're nuts. Take me home, or I'm going to call my dad." "Aw, come on, please. Everyone else is too chicken to go in." "Yeah, I thought you were known for not being scared of stuff. Are you scared to go in? That thing is a damn safety hazard. It's not stable. What if we step in and fall through the ducking floor or something? I am not dying today." They whined, begging me to go in with them. "You guys, it seriously doesn't look safe to walk in there. It's so old and worn down. We could get injured, and there's no one around to help us if we get trapped in there." "Okay, so, what if we just, open the door and look in? Don't go in? Would that be okay? You're not going to go inside? We'll just peek inside." I sighed. 5 minutes, and then I'm going back to the car, with or without you, and I'll wait there and call my dad, if I have to." Yeah. Just 5 minutes. Begrudgingly, I walk with them towards the house. There was a heavy feeling in my chest, sinking down into my stomach. I may be able to handle horror movies, but that's just a video on a TV. It's not real. They excitedly pulled on the front door, which was shaky and unstable. I stood back behind them, having no interest in looking inside this place. "Okay, just peek inside for a few minutes, and then we're leaving. Don't." Before I could even finish my sentence, they ran inside. "Are you ducking kidding me? Get the duck out of there. It's not safe." Just when I was about to take a step towards the door, it felt like the air was punched out of me. Something wasn't right. They giggled, walking around the first floor, as the floorboards creaked beneath them. "You guys," I gasped out. "Get out of there. This doesn't feel right. Something isn't right about this place." I stood at the doorway, holding my hand against the old, worn-out door for balance, so I wouldn't fall over. I looked around the darkness inside, only small streams of the sunlight leaking in through broken, worn-out panels nailed to what used to be a window, and the sunlight pouring in through the open doorway I was standing in. They had disappeared from my sight, their voices sounding more distant. I tried looking around, and I saw there was a doorway with an open door. No way I'm going in this house. Guys, I called out again. Please get out, it's not safe to be in there. I heard their distant voices, talking about something that I couldn't make out. Suddenly, there was this horrible smell. The smell was so strong and so awful that my eyes started to water, and I had to cover my nose. It smelled like rotten, decaying meat, sitting out in the hot sun. I looked around the inside of this old house, from what I could see in the doorway. A lot of it was bare, the only furniture inside was a few old, broken apart wooden chairs. The place had become a bit overgrown, reclaimed by nature. There was broken wood, glass, and other things scattered around. There was a staircase in the far off corner in the back of the house. I could still hear my friends talking from the other room. Guys, come on, get out of this damn house. I'm not coming in after you. All of a sudden, it got quiet. I heard the door to the room they were in slam shut. Guys, what are you doing? This isn't funny. I am not going inside. I heard a sound, coming from up above. I stepped back, away from the house. I heard my friend scream suddenly and call my name for help. I stood frozen, watching, waiting to see my friends run out laughing, telling me that they were pranking me. As I stood there, peering in, I saw something. Something hiding in the darkness at the top of the staircase. I backed up, getting further from the house. No, 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 I said, watching as the dark figure descended down the staircase, ever so slowly. I could hear the unstable staircase creaking and groaning with each step it took. Even with daylight shining around me, it was so dark inside this house that I couldn't see what it was. The figure was just a shadow. But I knew one thing. Whatever it is, I don't want it coming near me. I screamed out my friends' names, trying to warn them. Get out of the house, something's in there. Their screams hadn't stopped. Suddenly, I heard the sound of wood cracking. I couldn't hear my friends screaming anymore. Before I could panic, my friends ran at me from the side of the house. How did they get out? They were trying to catch their breath when they looked inside the open door. The shadow figure was standing at the bottom of the steps now, staring at the three of us. What the duck is that? One of them screamed out. Suddenly, we heard this disgusting, guttural sound. I sprang into action, slamming the door. Nope, I said, taking off running back in the direction of the road. Thank God that the season was done and the fields were cleared. If I had had to run through a full cornfield to escape this shadow thing. We made it to the car and climbed inside, locking the doors immediately. We were all breathing heavily, trying to catch our breath. My friend, who was driving the car, took off, racing off down the road. Once we had gotten far enough away, I looked at them. There was blood on their clothes. First off, why the duck did you guys not listen to me and just run in there? Are you ducking crazy? Secondly, why is there blood on you? We ducked up, okay? We should have listened to you. What the duck happened in there? Why did you door? The door. We didn't shut it. It shut by itself. What about the blood? They were both shaking. We were looking around the room, there were these weird symbols and drawings all over the walls. Then we heard something above us. It sounded like someone was up there, moving around. So, we were about to leave the room and come back out to you, and the door slammed in our faces. We tried opening it, but it wouldn't open, while we were pushing on it. Something was dripping on us from the ceiling. The ceiling was ducking leaking blood. That's when we started screaming and I stared at them in shock. The door wouldn't open, but there was an old window boarded up, so I grabbed some of the broken pieces of wood around to break it through, and we crawled out. I told you not to go in there. Was all I could get out. My friend in the passenger seat looked back at me. What was that thing? I didn't know what to say to them. I had no idea what that was. I had no idea what they saw in that room. This is why you don't go into creepy old disgusting ducking buildings for fun, you assholes. I screamed at them, tears pouring down my face. We're sorry, we just thought it was some old building, we didn't think anything would happen. That's how all the ducking horror movies start out, you idiots. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes before exploding again. Don't you ever try to bring me to some abandoned, creepy place in the middle of the goddamn woods ever again. After a while of driving in silence, my friend, who was driving the car, spoke up in a quiet voice. Hey, you know what's really weird? We looked at him, waiting for what he was about to say. Those drawings were still wet.